We turn now to who many are calling the most hated man in America.
Martin Shkreli, the pharmaceutical company CEO.
Who once jacked up the price of a life-saving drug. He was sentenced today for cheating wealthy investors out of millions.
Poke me, be careful how you poke and when you poke and how you do it, because I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. The way the law is constructed is they push a button and you're found guilty. That's it. We turned it from 3 million to something like $500 million to $1 billion.
Why is it, do you think, that you lean into this like evil person role and you seem to like enjoy it?
Ego is the fountainhead of all progress. I think ultimately without a little bit of ego and without a little bit of competition and competitiveness, nothing would happen.
What was your initial reaction going to jail?
The real scary part is that
Martin Shkreli, thank you so much for coming on the Iced Coffee Hour podcast. For a little introduction, if you guys don't know, you purchased a life-saving drug and raised the price of it 5,000% overnight. You bought a unique copy of the Wu-Tang Clan album for $2 million, and you refused to release it. You have beef with both Hillary Clinton and Ghostface Killah. You're banned from Twitter. You started a company that went to $1 billion at 28 years old. You're a convicted felon and have spent 4 years in prison. Hundreds of headlines have been ran by mainstream media saying you're the most hated man in America. And now you're making a comeback.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man.
That's a brief CV.
Would you say it's somewhat accurate?
I think you caught most of it, yeah.
You were just saying something about when you went to go shoot with Tucker Carlson, you're on probation.
Right.
And that has certain restrictions. And apparently you left the state, which you're not allowed to do without letting them know. They saw the Tucker Carlson podcast. Right. What happened with that?
Well, it's not abnormal to slip up when you're on probation. There's actually like a list of rules that you have to follow. And, I hesitate to say it's probation, the whole idea and institution is kind of useless because it does serve some value, but it's hard for the people who do probation to keep up with all of the people that they have to follow. Mm-hmm. And I think some of these people sometimes have so many, probation officer might have 50 or 100 or 200 people that they're monitoring. And it's, they obviously can't monitor their every step. And I think that in a lot of ways that nullifies kind of the benefits of it, which is, hey, you just got out of jail. You don't want to go back into a life of crime. We want to make sure that, you get a job and you do this and you do that and you kind of get on the straight and narrow again, which inevitably fails. Unfortunately, recidivism is quite high. Most people who go to jail go back, if not straight back. Sometimes I had a story about a guy, we called him Michael Goonberg in jail. He was funny. And Goonberg, great name, right?
What did he do?
Goonberg was a drug dealer, but he loved making money and just name stuck. And Goonberg was out of prison, 96 hours, comes right back, same prison. There's like, just go back to your old cell.
96 hours?
How does he go back in 96 hours? What did he do?
On a drug deal with his friends, but he's not the drug dealer. He's just riding. But the police pull him over. They're trying to throw all the drugs out of the car, and the police grab him and they're, all of you are arrested. And obviously if you get arrested while you're on probation, you're going back to jail. So if you take a trip out of state or something like that, it's really not that big of a deal. And I had a circumstance that was a decent excuse, but I think if you do it 5 times, you can actually go back to jail. And, there was a guy I knew in prison as well. We called him Card. I think Card. And he was gambling, just nut job, and, there are people who are addicted to gambling and he was one of them. And he would bet on anything. And he would bet, we don't have money in prison, right? But you do kind of in a lot of ways. There's assets that you have in prison, which aren't worth a lot.
Is that like food?
Yeah, things like that. Yeah. And, but if you wanted to, and we did this all the time, you can bet cash, and if you don't pay, there's this phrase we have, get it in blood. You can get it one way or the other. And, you tell somebody, look, you owe me $500, get on that phone and get your family to send it to somebody. I had this friend who's an assistant of mine, and she was like the most like white bread, kind of like innocent young woman, scientist type girl. And I bought a phone in prison for $1,000. And I said, look, there's only one problem. I told this girl, I'll call her Jane. Her name's not Jane, but I said, Jane, there's just one problem. You got to get the cash to this guy's people. Use words like peoples. His peoples on the street need $1,000, like ASAP. And if I don't get him $1,000, it's going to be problems. And she's like, okay, what do you want me to do? I said, you're going to get in a taxi. You're going to approach a car that's going to be waiting. It's going to have its headlights on. It's going to be in the Bronx. I was just joking, you know, and like you take $1,000, put it in an envelope and you hand it out. She's like, you know, tremendous, trembling with fear. She's like, are you serious? I was like, no, I just cash apped it, you know, but it was, I set up this whole drug deal for it. But that really does happen where, you know, if you get into gambling debt in prison, you got to go, you know, actually take care of it. And sometimes that'll be your brother or sister or father or mother or somebody like that, your wife even, that's to go pay the other inmate's wife in real life. And, you know, that was one way of transacting. So the point is that this guy ended up violating probation because he went to one of his conditions of probation. Everyone has slightly different ones. His was, you cannot go to a gambling establishment. Card went to casino 6 times. He was warned the first time. He said, look, you're going to go back to jail if you go back. And he's like, okay, Your Honor, I understand. He goes back again. They pull him back in.
That's
it's
just an addiction.
Does he just
at that point?
Clearly.
Or does he not care? Or is the addiction stronger than his desire to stay out of jail?
So many guys I met in jail. I'm trying to think of the next guy. His name was, I don't remember his name exactly, but this guy was kind of this like pretty mean looking fellow that loved to rob grocery stores. He robbed a grocery store for $75. You know, $100, $250, right? It's not a big take when you rob a grocery store. And he gets charged with something called the Hobbs Act, which is like basically the law that, you know, governs this. And it allows for the federal government to come down on you for what's fairly a local crime, which is not sort of supposed to be the case. You know, that's supposed to be a state crime. So this guy's like on his 6th Hobbs Act and he gets like 22 years or something like that. And we're just sitting talking, we got nothing to do. And I'm like, you really kind of like are addicted to this, basically, right? You're addicted to the thrill. It's not the money. Like you're not making, like you do this once a month. Like you're not making enough money to make ends meet. Like, but you're doing this because it's the thrill, isn't it? And he's, yeah, more or less. You know, I was the first person to like kind of get to the bottom of this, that, you know, you can be addicted to drugs, of course, but you could also be addicted to risk. You know, in Wall Street, we used to talk about people who are riskaholics. You could be addicted to danger and thrill. And I don't know, this can't be anything a lot more thrilling than robbing a bank. I mean, it's not thrilling to me maybe, but like to somebody, it's got to be. I mean, we watch movies about this like Heat or, you know, other films that, you know, make it like really exciting, a car chase or something like that. And there's people who do this in real life. And, you know, they find it fascinating and thrilling. And, you know, it's something that, you know, you can't really change. So, you know, my goal isn't to break any rule or regulation, but you know, in that specific circumstance, you know, is a good excuse. But it is surprising to me that the probation sort of construct, you know, it's sort of like when it doesn't work, it doesn't really help anybody most of the time. When it does work, it doesn't work very often. So it's like in general, just in the way and not really helping anybody. And recidivism kind of needs a better solution. I was talking to, I think it was like Palmer Luckey or somebody about this. Like, how do you actually incentivize people to not go back to jail? And like might have to do something like pretty grotesque to most people, which is like you actually pay somebody for every year they don't go to jail. And that sounds crazy because it's like, man, I don't get paid for not breaking the law.
Right.
Why do I have to pay this guy? And it's like, well, less crime. That's one way to do it. You know, it's not pretty, but it could work.
But then I feel like everyone would want to go to jail just to get
the first
paid.
time. Yeah, just
you
get
know?
under.
Yeah, you get one crime and then be like, hey, well, pay me $10,000 a year. I'm never going to do that again.
That's a good point.
Getting a felony is not easy. I just had one of my bank accounts canceled, you know, just randomly. You know,
just randomly? Did they find out? I feel like your name is
something like that, right?
known,
and it's
right?
just like, yeah, it's over. Sorry.
So
it's like
in those cases, could it be a person at the bank that just straight up says, I don't like this guy.
Could be any of the
Let's delete.
Sure.
It's at my discretion. For whatever reason, I have the right to it. I mean, it's a private institution. Would they have a right to just say, you know?
I think they did this with like the Proud Boys, you know, where it's like they weren't criminals exactly or yet or whatever. And it was just like, look, you're part of a group that some people think is like a white supremacist group or something like that. And it's like, we don't want to be the bank that handles your money.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways that makes sense. But the reason it's made a lot of sense for these banks is because, for example, Jeffrey Epstein had a bank account or brokerage account or whatever, a lot of money at Deutsche Bank and some other banks, JP Morgan, I think. Mm-hmm. They had to pay a lot of fines just because they had this guy's account. And it's like, you sort of have the government pushing down to business what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing. And to me, that's not great because, you know, you're basically, you have some of these services that are critical, like banking, becoming less critical thanks to crypto. But, you know, it's hard to live without a bank account and, or phone or things like that, utilities. You know, at what point does Con Edison say, yeah, you know, we saw your tweet and, you know, that's why your lights are out. You know, that I think that, you know, conceivably could happen someday. Thankfully, I think the woke world is sort of like moving back to the center, which is good. But I think that, and I don't blame a bank for saying maybe not wanting to deal with somebody who's convicted of a financial crime. I think that I can kind of understand that.
Kind of makes sense.
Yeah. But I still think like the idea that a bank could just basically decide that, they don't like your politics. Or
Do you think maybe that's some risk mitigation on their end where maybe the banks are afraid of the government? But before we go into that, are you running a business and you want to hear this sound a lot more? Well, our sponsor, Shopify, is there to help. Shopify is the global e-commerce platform that's already helped transform millions of businesses worldwide.
For example, Shopify has an endless list of integrations, third-party apps, and flexible templates to help customize your store exactly how you want it.
And what sets Shopify apart from their competitors is their ability to turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkouts that's 36% better on average than other leading e-commerce platforms.
And Shopify actually powers 10% of all e-commerce in the United States, supporting brands like Allbirds, Rothy's, and Brooklinen in over 175 countries.
In fact, my coffee company, Bankroll Coffee, runs exclusively through Shopify. And when it came time to look at platforms, Shopify was the best by far, and we had the best experience with them. Plus, they have an award-winning support team that's there to help you every step of the way.
So sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ICH, all lowercase. Grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/ICH.
Again, it's only a $1 trial period at shopify.com/ICH, all lowercase, and the link is also down below in the description. So thank you guys so much, and now let's get back to the episode. Do you think maybe that's some risk mitigation on their end, where maybe the banks are afraid of the government?
Well, that's
so
what
they
I'm
say,
getting.
We don't want a $100 million fine.
Right.
So it's easier for us to say, sorry, go somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like it's really sad because if they're avoiding an action from the government, which is, well, what's the government's impetus? It's to help the bank act as law enforcement. The bank doesn't know the guy's doing crime or not. They're not supposed to, sort of like see that. It's the KYC AML kind of like expansion that certainly for crypto is taking place, where it's like, they have to, you have to do so much background checking on your client that, and then you're supposed to sort of know whether or not like they're allowed to be, a customer or not. Like there was one analysis we had to do one time for like foreign dignitary. And it was like, well, does this guy from Uzbekistan, who's technically, in the government there, does he count as a KYC AML exemption or whatever? And it's like, who cares? Like, it's not, Osama bin Laden we're taking money from, it's like, but it's such a political thing that, for example, like the Russian oligarchs have been put on on this list. And if you do business with them, you're toast because they're on this exemption or whatever, this restricted list. And it's like, well, who decides that list and who decides when they get off or whatever? And, look, I'm not a fan of what some of those guys do, but it's sort of like, why is the government getting in the middle of this? And it's for basically control reasons, power reasons, and so forth. It's just any reason they can get to like sort of be in charge, they'll sort of take, which is sort of sad because, again, for somebody to be restricted for their brokerage account or bank account or anything else, it is a little frustrating. For example, I got banned from being a publicly traded, at least in the US, officer or director. And that's frustrating because I've been a very successful publicly traded CEO and director. I've never made a crime related to being a publicly, even a fake crime, like the ones I was convicted of. even one of those I haven't been convicted of being sort of having any crime related to being a publicly traded officer or director. And, Elizabeth Holmes had a settlement with the SEC where she got 5 years of not being a publicly traded. Mine was lifetime. If you have a lifetime ban for things that are like somewhat innocuous, or even if they're not innocuous, if you pay your debt to society and you can't ever recover from them, no matter how much penance you do, no matter how much growth you go through as a person, you're forever banned. It sort of doesn't make sense. It's not a society I think that most people want.
What are your thoughts on authority today? And has that changed since you were a kid?
Yeah, I mean, my whole life I've sort of been anti-authority.
Yeah.
And, I just think that,
where did that start?
I don't know.
Was there maybe a moment where your parents said something to you and you said, I disagree with that? When you started to come to your own and say, you know what? I don't have to do that thing. They want me to take a bath. I don't feel like taking a bath. I'm not dirty. Right. That is my choice. And I could choose not to do that.
I can't play psychologist and like go all the way back and sort of understand why it happened, but I do know it did happen at some point. And I think it was sort of a mix of a few things. I mean, one, I think that, arrogance in general is kind of like this pretty detestable property people have. And, anytime you can bring somebody down a notch, I've sort of relished that opportunity, sort of put myself in the mix and bring somebody down a notch. And, it's fun and most people enjoy that. Most people like to see that, and whether that's a bully or whomever, it's somebody has to sort of stand up and be the person that's, it's also going to take, the arrows and the, all the sort of, repercussions of that. But, if you're brave enough to do it, a lot of people sort of are looking behind you and saying, I'm not that brave, but good for that guy. And I think that, not being afraid of things is something that I've inherited as well. It's sort of like this natural.
And did anything happen that prompted you to be so, I think, very confident in who you are and what you believe in, and very shameless of just, here's what I believe, here's what I stand for. If you disagree, it doesn't bother me at all. And that's the vibe that I've gotten from listening to all of your interviews, is that it does not seem to affect you whatsoever. It's just, I am me and that's it, take it or leave it. And I think there's something that's very courageous about that.
Yeah, I think you have to have conviction. I mean, and the thing about conviction is you can be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. I've had opinions that I've changed my mind on. And I have confidence, but I've never have this idea of like being 100% right or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a feeling. I have a feeling that firms, it's like goes back to college, but like firms should set the price of their products, and nobody else should be able to do anything but the marketplace, buyers and sellers. Price too high, buyer walks away. Price too low, buyers flood the market. That's just the nature of economics. And I have a very firm feeling that that's really the way it should work, and that anybody who tries to influence that, should be kicked out because it doesn't help the world.
Yeah.
Markets help the world a lot. You have opinions like that. That's a really strongly held opinion. But I also have loosely held opinions, and I try not to express much confidence in that. And if you ask me about, say, LGBTQ affairs, I just sort of tell you, like, look, I don't really know a lot about that. I'm really not that confident. I kind of see both sides of current arguments about it. Et cetera, et cetera. If you ask me about Palestine or something like that, it just, I'm really not that convinced. So you have to be convinced. You have to have conviction, but on the things you know about and things you feel strongly about. And sometimes if those things are feelings that, they're more governed by emotion than rationality, people tend to believe those more than the other way around. It's like if you explain like why drugs have to be expensive, basically, if you have somebody in an audience that's willing to sit there and listen for an hour, you can basically convince them of that because it makes sense. But the visceral reaction is negative. The immediate reaction is, no, it can't be. And I gave this like speaking tour in the Ivy League circuit where I was trying to explain how the irrational numbers sort of came about. And way back then, there was this feeling that irrational numbers were like this evil concept and that they really couldn't be. And there was this emotional reaction to like, first of all, they can't exist. And two, if they did exist, that'd be really bad. And a guy proved it and they threw him in the river. And, it was this emotional reaction of like, this is such cognitively dissonant. I really don't like this. And it makes me feel icky. And unfortunately, there are things like that in life that we have to come to terms with. And when we do, the people who are the coldest, kind of quiet, rational, calculating people see them first. And those people are generally heretics.
What type of student were you?
Oh boy. Sometimes a great one, sometimes a bad one.
It seems like you have a very applied focus where if you care about something, you're interested, you give it 100%. Whereas if you're not, you kind of, but it maybe not, maybe it seems like you excel at no matter what you would pick.
It depends. So like, one of the problems with high school in general, and I gave $1 million to my high school, which is the biggest gift they've ever received, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of rich people who went to my high school. And it's not a school you have to pay money to get into.
Yeah.
And it's a very advanced school for very, very bright kids. And the problem with high school is you're going through a lot of psychological issues. And if you have a good family life, you can kind of focus on school. But if you don't, you end up getting into some issues. And I had some of those issues. But sometimes I did, really, really well. And sometimes it didn't. It really depended on a number of external factors. And one of those factors is growing up. So like if you're a child prodigy and people are like basically like putting you on display, to people like, wow, look at my boy. He can read, this chemistry textbook and he's only 7 or something like that. You're constantly in that cage or display cage or display case or whatever. And eventually, you sort of decide, well, wait a second, I want to do other things. And for me, those other things were meeting girls my age, playing basketball, playing guitar, being in a rock band. Like that was exciting to me. And school was sort of like performant. It was like, yeah, okay, I know this much algebra. Do I really want to know that much algebra? Yeah, kind of. But then it was like history, do I really want to know more about, European history? No, I don't. I'm done. And I was sort of adult enough to decide that I was done with some parts of it. And, there were some things that were fun, like French was something I had a lot of fun with. So as a student, I mean, it's just tough because like you want to learn everything. And to this day, I still read textbooks and I still try to learn new things because I don't want to be left behind. But you also have to balance it with actually applying it. And that's one of the hardest things to do. Like, what does it mean to be a good investor is one of the hardest things in the world to study and think about. And there's like this equal balance of philosophical rumination that I think you have to do to become a good investor. And then I think there's a lot of applied work you have to do. And the problem with the applied work is that your first 10 years of investing are kind of going to be trash no matter what. It's frustrating because you want to manage money, you want to trade, you want to do all this, but you just need some experience first. And it's the same thing for programming. It's the same thing for art. It's the same thing for everything. I mean, you need those 10 years or more or less, depending on who you are, of what it is, but it's not going to happen in 3 weeks.
Now, if you're watching this right now, you might notice that we're extra clear today, and that's because we're filming in 4K. It's very expensive to do. We've reinvested a lot of money back into the channel to bring this to you. However, we were able to grow past 900,000 subscribers by just doing the basics. And if you want to be able to do something similar, then our sponsor, StreamYard, is there to help.
StreamYard's a live streaming and content creation software that allows you to create high-quality content with just the click of a button.
What's really cool about them is that all you need is a camera and an internet connection, and from there, you can stream directly from your browser. You're also able to stream throughout multiple social media platforms at the same time, from Instagram to Facebook to LinkedIn to YouTube and more, which, by the way, is really helpful because if you're not on all the platforms right now, you're missing out because you never know which one is going to take off and do the best.
On a real note, though, we've been using them for years, like even way before they started sponsoring the channel. If you want to get started, they're the best way to do it for free with the link down below in the description.
Again, we've been using StreamYard personally for years now and absolutely love them. And like we mentioned earlier, you could get started today for free with the link down below in the description. Thank you so much. And now let's get back to the episode. How did you get started with investing?
I begged my dad, who just passed away. Guilt tripped him. This is one of his favorite stories.
Yeah.
I guilt tripped him into opening an E-Trade account. This E-Trade just came out, and it was like 96 or something like that.
Wow.
And maybe it was 98
with $20 commission trades.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Minimum $2,000.
Oh my god.
And I think that's still the minimum, but inflation is a bit different. So for us, for our family, $2,000 wasn't nothing.
Right.
It felt like a fortune to me. It turns out that it really wasn't a fortune to our family, but I didn't have a good sense that my parents were actually saving colics. They love to save money, every penny if they could. It's kind of like the old mentality, never had a credit card, never, just save the money. Like my dad would like literally get money orders and like didn't have a checking account,
Wow.
just.
So we're talking like cash,
money orders, like depositing the rent check, like, all of those types of things, cashing the rent, I don't know, paying the rent check. Like he'd go to the bank if he needed a check. It was like really wild.
Wow.
And, he just didn't trust like,
banks,
anything else.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my dad turned out to be pretty bright.
Okay.
Sounds about
Didn't
right.
trust the banks. I assume he had some gold. There's got to be some precious metals thrown in there. Usually there is.
No. And remember, my parents are from the poorest country in Europe, Albania. I recently joked that because I'm Albanian, I'm a person of color, and that's not the case. Albanians are white, but I tried to get some attention on Twitter and get people pissed off. Nobody's pissed off. Like one or two people got like, hey, actually, you're not a person of color. But like 10 years ago, you'd be canceled. You'd be on newspaper. Now it's like, and I'm not sure that's a good thing, honestly. But regardless.
So what happened with the $2,000?
So my dad opened this account. Under his name, because there's like rules against minors and stuff like that. So I'd always log in on my dad's name and I make some trades and, predictably, ultimately, I did okay for a little while, but ultimately, the account went to zero basically. And I actually would end up replenishing the account. About a year or two later, I'd go to Wall Street and I took my paycheck and deposited it. And it was a lot of this painful tuition of like investing, trying to figure out how to do it and then failing and keep trying and keep failing and keep trying. And eventually, okay, maybe the failure periods it takes longer to fail, maybe see a little success or something like that. And I think so many retail traders have to go through that. But I was also becoming a professional investor too, working at a hedge fund. So watching how they made trades and starting to think, okay, maybe, I should do something like this. But I still couldn't really compute this idea that leverage was bad. And it took a long time for me to really compute that. And you still see people like, for instance, for crypto is like this very like funny casino where like there's different things like KuCoin or Binance, I still think does this, and maybe others, maybe even like Kraken, who's like very good and responsible. And I'm sure Coinbase has something. Like basically all of these guys have some kind of product that lets you basically bet somewhere between 10 to 100x.
I'd say objectively leverage is bad in trading.
I would say so, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, like the best traders I've ever met not only do they not use leverage, they can't find enough great trades to use the cash they have. Which is really
kind of a Warren Buffett approach.
Really
you're sitting on
wild.
so much cash, and you just sit there and you wait.
I have
and you're patient for decades.
Yeah, I have a friend who is one of Steve Cohen's early partners, way back when. And there's some people who, Steve had some of the best traders of all time, and there's some other firms that had those too. Because there just weren't that many great hedge funds back then. So a lot of people trace their lineage to Tiger, Soros, Steinhardt. Steve Cohen sort of came a little bit after in a handful of other firms. There's one called Odyssey that was similar. And this guy worked for Cohen. They're still, I think, fairly close friends. And he had never had a down quarter ever. He had about 30-40% returns over the years. But his average exposure is a bit of a hedge fund term, but basically what percentage of your capital you're actually using. Anything over 100% is leverage. Anything below 100% is kind of weird. Like supposed to put your money to work. This guy had like 30-40% gross exposure.
Wow.
So like when he traded, he just never lost. But he had discipline to not make bad trades. Right. And, there are a lot of traders like that where like they actually do better the less they trade.
What have you seen most hedge fund managers trade, and how do they trade differently than the average retail investor?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson for me, and this is something I had to go through a lot of pain for this. And I saw it a lot with the Wall Street Bets world as well, where I was like an early member trying to talk sense into those folks who, I enjoyed their passion for the markets. I enjoyed the memes, but I also was like trying to explain like the idea of you only live once is like so antithetical to being a good investor. Yes, you do only live once, but your portfolio can have 100% drawdown. You got to start from scratch. And kind of the whole idea of capitalism is that you kind of keep growing it. And so I think the biggest lesson is this idea of like, don't water your weeds and don't pluck your roses too early. And I was even talking to somebody yesterday or this morning actually about Peter Thiel's biggest regret, not buying more Facebook. And like when, he was the very first investor in Facebook and he got to buy 10% of what's now $1 trillion company for $500,000. And, that stake, if he kept it, would be worth, some insane number, like, 50 billion or more. And that's from an investment. He's not founder of Facebook. And, he sold. He sold because it was up a lot and he said, oh, time to sell. And I think that like a lot of people, when they got addicted to Bed Bath & Beyond, GameStop, AMC, just kind of bad companies and bad stocks, sort of different things, which is very hard to sort of tell the difference sometimes. So that's one of the key things. But I think the key thing is like, okay, I bought a bad stock. It happens to everyone. It's going to happen to everyone. Don't like fall in love with it and believe that like it can't be a bad. I can't.
People like
it can't be a bad.
People
company.
like the community though. It's
Yes.
very rare to find a community of investors who like one thing and all bond over that one thing. And I think it's that community that keeps people holding on to stocks. I've never seen it before where people pick one company and they just say, I am diehard. I think Tesla was one of the first ones that I saw, but it expanded throughout meme stocks and all of these other companies.
I think the internet's to blame.
Yeah.
Because I think you did have that in more private communities where, you'd have dinner with a couple hedge fund people and they'd be like, oh, yeah, John's a, Tesla lover, et cetera, et cetera. And, oh, Steve, he's a Tesla hater, and we'd be like, John, you're still in Tesla? Oh, 6 years in. Wow. You still haven't sold. And you have those conversations, but I think the pathological thing is when you become addicted to it to a point where it's like, no, AMC can do no wrong or GameStop can do no wrong. And it's like, look, the numbers don't lie. The balance sheet is what it is. The income statement is what it is. You shouldn't have that much passion about it. Now, if and this kind of comes to like the greater point of capitalism in general and like stock picking, which is why it's hard, is that managers are very hard to sort of size up as an investor. Because if a manager can compound capital and find ways to use the company's capital in new and profitable ways, basically there's no price you wouldn't pay for their stock like that if you knew that ahead of time. So if you look at Microsoft, this is a company that went public, for, I don't know what the market cap was like 300 million or 500 million. And since they started, since they went public, maybe in like 1980, they've been able to compound, their capital and their resources and put them to work to a point where they're now, two or whatever $1 trillion company. And if you knew the management team that was so good, that good, you would have, basically there's no price you wouldn't have paid because eventually you would have gotten trillions of dollars in market cap. And Buffett's the same example. You can't value a company necessarily on price to earnings or DCF because what's the CEO going to do and what's the board going to do in the management team as a whole? That's the bigger question. The business itself sometimes is easy to value, sometimes isn't. But can management take the capital from the business and actually make something great? And that's why it's impossible almost to like value a Tesla because it's like, yeah, I can do all the numbers I want. I can really study the products. I can really study everything like that. But that's not what most of the value of Tesla is. Most of the value of Tesla is the boss taking cash flows and or investor money and making something new with it. Yeah. And that makes it really, really hard to even value something like Lululemon, which is like, okay, it's a clothing business. I actually tried to short Lululemon for a little while. It's been a tough experience.
How did you meet Jim Cramer?
Oh, well, as you can tell, I talk
Yeah.
too much. And when I was a young kid, I just loved talking about stocks. And I didn't know a lot about investing, but I knew a lot about the companies. It's kind of relative to my age.
Yeah.
Obviously didn't know a lot about anything, but I really didn't know much about investing philosophy, but I knew a little bit about like the actual details of the companies. And it was a lot of fun to learn those details. And people were like, this kid won't shut up about the stock market. Maybe you should meet Jim Cramer. And the guy who said that knew like the office manager, at the firm. And I said, sure, I'd love to do that.
How big was he back then, by the way?
So back then it was like $300-400 million hedge fund. It was, a good chunk of the money was his. One of the weirdest hedge funds, because at the time, maybe not weird for the time, but it was basically a domestic only hedge fund, which these days doesn't really exist. Most of the people who invest in hedge funds are institutions who are tax exempt or foreign investors, because there's really no point in paying the K1 you pass through capital gains tax, which is kind of nuts. And believe it or not, Renaissance is also kind of like a fairly domestic oriented hedge fund because most of the money is kind of like individual people. And so for Cramer, like a lot of our partners were just like well-known people, actors or different like various wealthy people, some doctors and things like that. But the big investors today in hedge funds are institutions. And in fact, if you look at someone like Bridgewater, like their biggest investor, like the Mormon Church, or like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, like things like that, because like you got to put together all that capital and invest. Their minimum investment's like so enormous, like $1 billion at least. And back then, hedge funds were a little different. They're more like very much like a cottage industry,
Maybe like a family office sort of deal.
Yeah, it's like very
Okay.
small companies, 10 people. Cottage industry. Nobody had thought to supersize a hedge fund. And in fact, my friend who was an early partner of Steve's said that his biggest regret, this is a guy who to me was a master of the universe. And he said, and we were talking about Oxif and Citadel, which at the time were two of the biggest hedge funds. And I said, yeah, it's amazing. How did this guys manage so much money? He said, Martin, my biggest regret is not like taking the hedge fund business seriously in the sense that you could like scale it into something so big. And Millennium and Citadel and Bridgewater and those firms have done that by basically deciding that, yes, the returns are important, but the amount of assets are also extremely important. And I think like the old world in hedge funds was the only thing that mattered was the returns. It didn't matter how much capital you had because the returns were almost like it's almost like how many points you put up, for a basketball game or something like that. It really mattered for you that you were the best. And like Raj Rajratnam was a really good example of that, where he was like addicted to beating everyone else every year. And he got so addicted to it, he committed insider trading over and over again. and he did more time than I did, which is really sad. I mean, I'm laughing, but, I do think that, that like performance anxiety and performance addiction is like one of the things that has made hedge funds like this hazardous industry. If you look at the top maybe 10 or 20 hedge funds of all time, about 20-30% of them shut down because somebody went to jail, and the other 20 or 30% shut down because somebody didn't quite go to jail but could have, and they just had some other scandal. And the other half of them, have been able to sort of make it by squeaky clean, but often with not so great returns. So, it's a really crazy industry in a lot of ways.
What's the best and worst trade you've ever made?
Oh, Jesus. I thought you told me you wouldn't ask me a hard question. Well, there's a lot of ways to think about trades, and I think this is the thing that a lot of people, if they knew, they would be better traders. People think about trading as securities, and that's the only thing you could trade as security, and that's just so wrong. You could trade anything, and anytime you make a trade, and this is like corporate finance 101. My 14th-year-old Christmas present was a corporate finance textbook. The Briley Myers corporate finance textbook, still a standard textbook in academic finance. And ultimately, like anything you do, you can basically think about it as investment. And once you start thinking the world through that lens, I think a lot of things change. Because the securities on the menu, is the metaphor I like to use, sometimes you want to order off the menu. And I think you do a lot better when you do that. And so when I think of the menu in hedge funds, it's usually like domestic stocks, well-trafficked stocks, liquid stocks, stuff like that. And everyone's looking at the same shit. And it's really boring because if everyone's looking at the same thing, everyone's like putting a microscope under the same securities. Well, there's some security somewhere else that nobody's looking at. And yeah, you might have to learn Korean, or you might have to do something like that. But like, how do you turn a small pile of money into a large pile of money? Right? That's kind of the goal. And you think about like, I don't really care how I do that. All I really care about is that I do it, right? Because nobody's going to ask, when you're in your Hamptons, summer house with, a pool bigger than, the Atlantic Ocean, that, you're, and you're sipping your martini, that, oh, how exactly did you make all this money? You're really just like, wow, this guy's rich. And again, whether or not that's something you should be shooting for in life is, something we could talk about in another podcast. But assuming that's what you want, that's really the focus. Is like, I'll do anything to win. And the pile of money is the important part. So I think like private equity is, when you start to think about liquidity, is like, well, maybe you don't care about the liquidity, because if all you care about is the money transformation, what does it matter if it's a 4-letter ticker or a private asset? And I think the private asset industry for pharma is something that's now become extremely, well, sort of looked at. But at the time, there was only one guy in New York who's like really looking at this stuff really closely, and his name is Lindsay Rosenwald, and he's still active, I think. There's another group that did it called Royalty Pharma, but they only did pharma royalties. But then I started to look at drug assets like stocks. And
how did you even come on? Like, learn?
Well, hold on. What was the trade? What was the?
I'll get to it in a second.
Yeah. Okay.
So like,
all right.
So starting to look at drugs like stocks instead of just stocks without a ticker, but they're stocks in essence. They have some value. They don't have 10 Qs and Ks, but they have different properties, but they're still financial assets in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And so this guy, Rosenwald, he was doing a bit of it, but he didn't have a good reputation. People really didn't like him for whatever reason. He had a couple wins. He had a lot of losses. He tended to not use his capital. He just tended to hold a stake in the company and sort of germinate it. And he did this like hundreds of times. And he actually did really well. But I think people didn't like the kind of like heads I win, tails I win kind of style that he financed it in. And then I started to do it as well. And then Roy Vivek Ramaswamy's company, sort of took our business model and times it by 100. And it worked out really well for him. So like when you look at all kinds of assets as they're just possible trades, you can really find some amazing opportunities. There was one company that I particularly that stood out to me. We found this asset. It wasn't me who found it, by the way. It was a teammate. And he said, I think we can do something here. And I said, well, what's the story? So there's a kidney stone disease that only happens if you have a genetic mutation. And there's like 7 kinds of kidney stones. There's like calcium stone. There's a cysteine stone. This was cysteine stone. There's like, they form into these. Have you ever seen a physical kidney stone?
They look very painful.
Fucking
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a rock.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
salt pieces.
Yeah.
Big.
And that's going through you.
Yeah.
And it's tougher for men than women, I think, by the way. But regardless, it's pretty painful. They say it's like a childbirth almost, and you're passing the stone is
Right.
like this really unbelievable, painful thing. It's not exactly fatal disease. It's not exactly going to kill you, but you don't want a kidney stone.
Mhm.
And there's a genetic cause of kidney stones called cystinuria. And there's a company out in Texas, and they had this drug. And the only reason anybody took this drug was to stop their kidney stones, their genetic kidney stones. And they stopped making it. And it was wild because the people with this kidney stones were like, what the fuck? I'm going to have to pass a stone now. And they're like, the only drug I could take for this now is OxyContin. Like that doesn't even work, but I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in this enormous amount of pain, for no reason, because you guys, why do you stop making it? And the reality is there's a lot of medicine that companies don't want to make or they won't make because there's not enough money in it. And this drug was selling $2 million a year, which is, I don't even think you can break even on that. $2 million just to like file your annual forms with FDA and all this stuff. If you're breaking even, you're lucky. But you're certainly not making much of a margin because you got to make the stuff and you got to make it in a plant that's, FDA approved plant. And there's a number of other fees now that come with having an FDA approved drug. And don't forget, you have an infrastructure that you got to pay for too. The drugs have to pay for your office and your, all that stuff. So there's like some capitalized portion of everything in your company is being kind of like pro rata assigned to all the costs you have. So you have some incremental margins, probably like $1 million, but you still have like the lawyers at your company, like part of their responsibility is that drug. The salespeople, part of their responsibility is that drug. So you have these associated costs that do exist. Some people think of like, oh, gross margin is really it, but it's like, well, you still have other costs. Your audit is some percentage related to that drug. Even though that drug is small, it pays for some of the audit. So basically, it's unprofitable if you ask me. And so they stopped making it because they forgot. They actually forgot to order another batch.
Just because it wasn't making them enough money to really pay attention.
Small piece of the pie.
Yeah. Well, I was in Switzerland once with a major drug company, won't name, and I met one of their guys. The company had like 500 drugs, but like 5 made all the money. The other 495 didn't. And I met a guy who's like literally responsible for like 300 of those drugs. And I would ask him like an encyclopedia of medicine, but I would like rapid fire ask him like, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for that, you're responsible for that. I can't say the drug names because it would give away what company it is. And he was just like shocked. He's like, he's in this like Swiss French accent. He's like, my portfolio better than I do. And he's like laughing. And I'm like, that's not funny. That's scary. Like people need these medicines, man. And, I would like love to troll through these old medicines and buy them. That's kind of what Vivek did a little bit as well in a different way. And, so this company just forgot. And it's not surprising because, again, think about this Swiss French guy who's like, I didn't know like if this is what the supply, chain looks like for drugs number 273 in our portfolio. Why would I know? I just know because like this company is a product of like 18 mergers. So like merger 1 was for, drug company has 3 drugs, other company has 10 drugs. We merged. Now we have 13.
So the pharmacy industry is really looking at these medicines, not so much as medicines, but investments. How much can we make off of each medicine and what's the ROI?
I think it's
like, obviously there's got to be some benefit to justify it.
Every product you have as a company has to be looked at, that way. It's a business. So you can't be in business unless you think about it as investments and things like that. I mean, but I think that this company sort of had this problem where they had their attention elsewhere, and thinking about the supply chain of this drug wasn't just on top of the mind. And they figured, okay, well, we just order it again. And it takes like 6 months to get the order done. So you got people who are, really sick for 6 months, and it sucks. And, we went in there and we said, look, we'll give you $3 million. And we actually tried to buy the whole drug, and they said they didn't want to do that. So we racked our brains. We tried to pay through the nose for it. They still didn't want to do it. And we basically said, we're going to manage the commercialization of this drug from now on. We're going to pay you $3 million upfront, like today, to sign this deal. And no matter what, we'll pay you $2 million or more than $2 million. I forget what it was, like maybe $3 million guaranteed minimum every year. So like more than what you're actually selling now. We'll take over all the commercialization. We'll field the sales force. But we also get to control pricing. And that was kind of like bullet point 8. And bullet point 8 was important because what we did is the price of the drug was $2,000 a year, and we increased it to $80,000. And the craziest thing about this is the number of people on the drug. You would normally think, like take a microeconomics course, that as you raise price, demand goes down. And it even applies for medicine. Demand actually went up. So more people were able to access the drug. More people were able to take the drug.
Why did demand go up? Was that you marketing the drug? You were just marketing it to more people.
More people were aware.
I think doctors, when they look at kidney stones, they don't necessarily understand that, most nephrologists do, but a lot of doctors don't really understand there's a genetic cause of kidney stones. And that if you have your first kidney stone, you don't want another one ever again.
Right.
And so why not get that genetic test? Some people just say, here's the stone, whatever, I'll keep it as a souvenir, I'll throw it away. But, I'm done and I'm not going to get one again. Well, if you get a second one, a third one, a fourth one, you have a genetic illness, then this drug basically stops all of it from happening.
How do you
Amazing.
How do you advertise that drug? Is that through commercials or is that through sales reps?
With ultra rare diseases like this one is, again, there were a couple thousand people need this medicine. Not millions of people. So there's no point in advertising on television or anything like that. You get like 10, 20 sales reps, and you find the biggest nephrologists in the country who see patients with kidney stones, and you just can't have a conversation with them, explain, what to look for and things like that.
So how was that price then changed for the people actually needing the drug? Because I'm assuming most people went for through insurance.
Yeah.
How would that affect their premiums? And also, how much money were you making per year off of this? What was it, $3 million investment?
Yeah, so it was basically a $3 million investment if you think about it. And so, insurance doesn't, a lot of people don't understand health insurance, which is why, there's sort of this backlash. A lot of people don't understand pharma either. There was a drug out there I was actually an investor in. I wanted to be like one of the early investors, but I had to settle for the IPO. This drug costs $2.3 million a year. Right? There's no patient on planet Earth that can afford it. And it's for babies, interestingly. And it's a lethal illness. It saves their life. And it's amazing. Before this, it was death sentence disease. Now you can actually survive it, which is amazing. And it's $2.3 million because nobody has this disease. It's very, very rare. But if it's your baby, it's the most important thing in your life. There's nothing more important. And you'll do anything to save your baby's life. And this drug costs a fortune to make. It costs a fortune to research. And because nobody has it, they have to price it basically at this price to make it make sense. And, every insurance carrier pays for it immediately because their job isn't so much to avoid cost, which I think is also a misunderstanding. So you got like hundreds of little misunderstandings that compound into like this gigantic misunderstanding, which is unfortunate because I don't expect the average Joe to like know everything about the pharmaceutical industry or the research part of it or the pricing part of it or the orphan drug part of it or like, all the little details that are in the system, which is like this very complex machine. But generally speaking, insurance companies for life-saving medicine never say no. And they may sound surprising, but their job isn't so much to lower costs. They actually like higher costs in some. Their job is to make sure the spending makes sense. So if you want Ozempic and, metformin is like the best drug to take for diabetes, but you want Ozempic because you want to lose weight, it makes a lot more sense for them to say no and to say, look, you got to take metformin. You got to take this other drug. Insulin and Ozempic come last, after you've failed the cheap drugs. Because why should we spend our client's money? Our client is Microsoft, Walmart, whoever that's buying the health insurance or the managed care. It's the best way to put it. And we're not going to waste their resources because they may need this drug for $2 million to save somebody's life. That we kind of have to pay for, but it's so rare that $2 million doesn't really add up because the whole healthcare cost to treat Microsoft's employees like $50 billion or something. It's not ever going to be something that, is that meaningful. And that's a cost that doesn't make sense for us to share with the patient. So the copay is zero. Because what are we going to get? $50 out of a patient? Doesn't make much sense. But if you're thinking about Ozempic, it's like, look, you want Ozempic, you better pay for all of it or half of it or something like that. And that makes sense. So they're managed care in the sense that they try to decide, okay, what's important, what isn't. And where are we wasting money when we could be saving money? For example, there's 20 antidepressants that are generic, but drug companies come up with new ones all the time. They don't sell too well, but they try to push the new antidepressant. It's like, look, you take Prozac. Prozac's been generic 20 years, it's like 5 cents. Why would we pay for the new antidepressant that's like $5 a pill when this thing's 5 cents a pill? Just doesn't make sense. And that's why generics are like close to free, or $3 or $5 when you go to the pharmacy. And when you go for the pharmacy and your doctors prescribe you a drug that you don't really need, it's like $217. And you're like, what is this? And it's probably because 95% of drugs are now generic. And the list of drugs that have gone generic over the last 40 years is you can basically treat the world's problems with that list. The brand new drugs are, they're still helping the world, but we've accumulated so many great drugs that are now off patent that most of medicine is being treated by this sum of drugs. The new ones that come along every now and then are nice. They're absolutely important. They're needed. For diseases like cancer, diseases like some super rare diseases. Alzheimer's needs a couple of new medicines, obviously. But in some, the drugs we have today can treat most of modern medicine for close to nothing. And that's like a miracle of the generic drug industry. So anyway, kind of getting distracted here, but I think that, patients for rare diseases never bear the brunt of the cost. And what's ironic, I have like this Discord community and stuff like that. A lot of my community members are rare disease patients because they understand that they need a company to care and to make money to get a chance to survive. I have a friend who has osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a rare bone disease. Never heard of it. Osteoporosis, probably heard of, your mom might have it or something like that. But OI is extremely rare. He has OI type 3, very rare disease. He has had over 500 bones broken in his life. He's about 4 feet tall.
Wow.
He can't really move. His disease will probably kill him. Every year he expects to die. He's 20-something. And he says, he knows that I happen to know a lot about OI for some reason, because I like rare diseases and I like studying them, and it's my field. And we talk about OI. We talk about, it's a collagen processing disorder and this and that. And he would like nothing more than to be able to walk. He'd like nothing more than to be able to make a strong bone like we have. But he can't, because that's his lot in life. For him, the idea of the price mattering, or the idea of a company making money mattering, is so far removed from the idea of being able to walk. He would be ecstatic if somebody made $1 billion off of his disease and that he got to walk. He would be ecstatic. He would praise that person. And he's encouraging me to be that person. He's like, come up with a drug for my disease. Charge whatever you want. Help me walk. That's what I care about. I hope you become rich, doing this. And I think that, that makes sense to somebody with the illness. A family that has a kid dying of muscular dystrophy needs someone like Vivek or me or someone like that to make $1 billion saving their son's life. I met many mothers who have a kid, a boy, it's a male disease, with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And they're like, we hope you become richer than Elon Musk.
Some people, I think, argue that they say, well, if you charge such a high amount to the insurance company, that means my premiums are going to be going even higher. Mm-hmm. And I have to pay for that. So you could make money. What is your response to
Good. Well, healthcare is important. I think that we should pay more and more for healthcare. And what's funny is that we are. Since the 60s, healthcare as a percentage of GDP has gone up from 6% to like 20%. And I think over time it'll go to 90%. Why? Why is all of our GDP going to go to healthcare? Because it's the most important thing in our life. If you look at percentage of GDP from the 20s, alcohol and tobacco were like 10% of GDP. That started to taper off. Rent was a big part of GDP. And these things have changed where entertainment and healthcare have become like two of the biggest expenditures, because the other necessities have become kind of cheap, and we could live with, food costs. You basically live with, you can find a way to eat for very little and things like that. But for healthcare, it's a good, getting back to like economics class, the marginal demand for healthcare is never exhausted. You can never be healthy enough. I can have enough t-shirts. I can have enough square footage of apartment where I say, I don't need any more. I don't have any marginal demand for the next 10 square feet or the next 100 square feet. But for healthcare, yeah, it's pretty much like an infinite demand. I mean, I never want to be like less healthy. And, I think that that's going to drive this demand. And you're seeing it now with people like, I think his name's Brian Johnson, and other people who like longevity people. I'm kind of an anti-longevity person, but the idea that like people don't want to just be healthy, they want to be superhuman. And they want to live forever, which is like, really like taking it to the next level. And I think that's that the actions of like one actor, like myself or somebody else, has not changed the idea that the 6% has gone to 20%. That's a demand-driven function. It's not because one person has said, no, my drug's going to be more expensive or something like that. It's more because people crave healthcare, and there are mechanisms in place like generics. There's actually alternative drugs, for example, to Daraprim. You start off with saying it was a life-saving drug. It's not exactly true. And the media said that, it was the only drug to treat that disease. That's also not true. I didn't mind correcting those, though, because I didn't want to correct them, because our fear actually was Daraprim would get competed by this other really cheap drug that was available for like 5 cents a pill. Ours was $7.50 a pill. But doctors didn't switch to the 5 cents a pill one because it's not exactly the same, but it works more or less, I think, just as well as Daraprim. And our biggest fear was that we did lose some customers to that, but we thought we'd lose them all. And all ABC had to do, or New York Times had to do, was say, Shkreli raises price of drug, alternative seen just as good. Use the alternative. That's all they had to do. And like imply strongly that, hey, no big deal. Use this other drug and he's going to lose all his business. They didn't do that. They should have.
They wanted to paint you as the villain.
I think the better story is that this drug has no alternative. And again, the drug, it's called Bactrim. You can look it up.
So I was under the impression that was the only solution then.
No, it's called trimethoprim. It's a very common antibiotic. It kills toxoplasmosis at the same rate as Daraprim. And we were thrilled that nobody would say that out loud. And
you're also getting a lot of publicity, I'm sure, from this whole, being the most hated man in America. But real quick, how much money was that drug making?
So yeah, we turned it. Sorry for the question. Yeah.
Keep going.
So we turned it from $3 million to like, I want to say the asset value was something like $500 million to $1 billion. And the annual income was something like $50 to $80 million.
$50 to $80 million.
But it's every year.
$3 million.
Yeah, well, $3 million one time.
And you'd say that's the best investment you've made?
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
Okay, now, very quickly and concise, what's the worst investment you've made?
Here's a crazy statistic for you. 52% of men over 40 experience some form of erectile dysfunction. But like many other health problems, no one wants to talk about it, and also no one wants to take the time to deal with it. And that's why you should check out our sponsor, Hims. Hims is a 100% online platform that's changing the game when it comes to men's health. Hims provides simple and convenient access to science-backed treatments for erectile dysfunction, as well as hair loss, weight loss, and more. Treatments come in chewable tablets or pills, no doctor's office visits are required, and if prescribed, your medication will be shipped directly to you for free in discreet packaging. Plus, you don't need insurance. You'll pay one low price for your treatments, online visits, ongoing shipments, and provider messaging, and you could track everything on the Hims app. So if you're a part of the 52% of men and you're not getting the treatment you need, you can start with a free online visit today at hims.com/ICH. That's HIMS.com/ICH to get personalized treatment options, or click the link down below in the description. Once again, it's hims.com/ICH. Prescription requires an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See hims.com/ICH for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Thank you so much, Hims, and back to the episode.
Okay, now, very quickly and concise, what's the worst investment you've made?
There's a lot of bad investments I've made over the years. I think that the worst investments happen when you have the hubris that comes from good investments and you decide that your core competency extends to everything. So like the investments I'm the most mad about aren't necessarily investments that have maybe lost a lot of money, but they're like the worst from a philosophical perspective. So for example, I put about $1 million into a record label and $1 million into an esports team. And both were zeros, but I've made zeros before. I made bigger zeros before, but they've been in pharma, where I know something about the field. Music is perfectly fine business, but it's not something I know anything about. And esports is also somewhat, maybe not perfectly fine business, but I'm sure you can make it work, but it's not something I know anything about. I just liked esports. And so those are just wastes of money, basically. And, when you start finding yourself, investing in restaurants, which a lot of rich people do, investing in real estate, and you made all your money doing other stuff, you're basically asking for it, because, what do you know about this stuff? You spent 10 or 20 years studying pharma to become good at pharma, and you invest in pharma, and you decide to take that money and invest in something else that you spend about 5 minutes on. And you're not correlating the fact that hard work and that institutional knowledge you've built up is what's making you the money. Because if it was that easy and you were just a good investor, period, it'd be a lot easier to do that. And it turns out that for a lot of people that does become their downfall.
What did you spend the money on that you made?
Oh, I didn't really. I mean, I'm just an investor. I mean, I live very modestly. I'm not, a spender, I've lived in like the same level of apartment I've had for a long time.
Yeah, like when I saw the Vice documentary on you, I'm sure you could very easily have a penthouse somewhere in the nicest place of Manhattan, chauffeur all the time, Ferraris, watch collections, art collections. It seemed it seemed like you had
Expensive albums.
It seemed like you had more of an interest in playing a good game of chess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like a lot of people, like for me, getting a good chance to read a lot in prison was a lot of fun. Like those types of things are the most enjoyable things you can do, in my opinion. Money, I think, can't really get you the true happiness or the true thrills that you really like. So for me, like if I could never make another dollar in the rest of my life, or have a math theorem named after me that I proved like a really tricky math theorem, I'd take the math theorem, all day, because it's an immortalization of something really tough to achieve. Anyone can make money. Look at Mark Cuban. It's not hard. I think that it's certainly from an intellectual perspective not hard. I think psychologically it's very hard. But intellectually you don't have to be smart to make money. I mean, that's Warren Buffett said it a million times. He said if you got 130 IQ points, sell 30 IQ points to get a burger, and you're just as likely to make money with 100, because unless you're in some really, really esoteric field like biotech or hardware engineering or something like that, which even still your massive intellect's not going to help you that much, because a drug's a drug. It's really not that complicated. It's about perseverance.
So why do you think so many people are unsuccessful at things that they attempt?
I think it's the number one reason is perseverance. I think Musk has said this as well. Like, you give up. You get punched in the gut, you get punched in the face, and you're on the floor and you're saying, this sucks, and entrepreneurship sucks. I had this feeling last night, and I'm still going to go to work later. I'm still going to keep fighting. And that's the hardest thing to cultivate, is like, we're taught that like Pavlovian style, that like you keep burning your hand on the stove, like it's time to leave. And that's, it's human conditioning. And especially if you have family and friends are like, what are you doing? You could be making so much money, Jack, if you just go back to your old job. They're paying you good, and you say, I really got to try this. I got to make sure. And they go, well, you tried it. You've been at it 2 years and you failed. Go back to the old job, or I'm divorcing you, or something like that. And that pressure, societal pressure, is really hard to overcome. And sometimes you are wrong. And so that doubt will seep into your head, and you say, yeah, maybe she's right. Maybe I suck at this. And being an entrepreneur is like, masochistic activity. I mean, you really have to be out of your mind. And a well-adjusted person, just take the job that pays you good and have a family and be cool, be able to do your hobbies. And being an entrepreneur is like, no, you're up at 3 a.m. answering a customer service call or something, or like you're noticing at 1 a.m. Oh, this thing is broken on our website. We got to fix that. Like, that life sucks. There's nothing good about that. It's basically like, I think a lot of entrepreneurs come from a place of trauma, abuse. People who have this old hedge fund guy, Michael Sternhardt, used to only like to hire orphans because they were so used to being abused and unhappy, and they could never reach self-actualization, where they basically could never be good enough. They always would try to be good enough, but they can never be good enough. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are like that. And if you read Elon's biography or anybody else's, like, I came from like an abusive household and so forth. But if you are a normal person that like does normal things and is happy with what you got in life, which is the way you should be, entrepreneurship doesn't make sense. But if you have a megalomaniac personality, or you just want to satisfy a thing you can never satisfy, or things like that, that's where the entrepreneur comes in. And I think those people are, including myself, just are wired differently, and not really in a good way from a psychological perspective. But we also need those people. Ayn Rand said that the ego is the fountainhead of all progress. I think it's true. I think ultimately, without a little bit of ego and without a little bit of that, rivalry and competition and things like that, competitiveness, nothing would happen. Somebody needs to have started the company that you can work the cushy job at, and I think that's kind of like what the entrepreneur's role is. But it comes from a place of usually some like somewhat dark stuff. I mean, I do think there are people that, have been entrepreneurs and they've done it maybe in a more positive light, but I know thousands of entrepreneurs. Like, this is a common trait I see. Is like, there's some, like, I was talking to Paul Merlucky the other day, like I mentioned him twice now, but I haven't caught up with him in a while. And the first thing he said was just like, Martin, I got to prove that I'm not a one-trick pony. It's like, you created Oculus at 19, you sold it to Facebook for $3 billion, right? Most people, it's over. Right? I mean, you're the king of the world. How do you top that? But he gets fired at Facebook, right? For being right-wing. And man, it put lights of fire under his ass. And he could just invest his money for the rest of his life, right? He's got the best deal flow. Everyone's coming to Palmer for investments. He says, I'm not going to invest in anybody else. And I think he hasn't. And he starts a defense company, which is kind of wild. There hasn't been a new defense company in 50 years. And the defense company is now worth more than he sold Oculus for. It's like worth like $10 billion. And it's like, and he's sitting there saying, I got to prove I'm not a one-trick pony. It's like, to who? What are you going to prove to anyone anything, dude? And I didn't say that, but the reality is that's what drives people like that. It's the one hater like Jason Calacanis or something like that. It's like, I'm going to make you regret ever doubting me. I'm going to make it so bad for you. You're going to be so embarrassed. And like, you find that foil of like and it becomes the object of your attention and the object of your obsession to make this guy look bad for ever talking shit about you.
How do you deal with all the criticism, all the hate, all the negativity?
I don't get any anymore. It's frustrating. It's almost
but initially going through it.
Yeah.
I mean, you were everywhere.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? Was there ever a point where you were afraid to walk outside or embarrassed to be out in public, or was?
No, he would dox himself.
Yeah.
He would he would go on live streams, and I remember this, and you'd be like, I'm walking right in front of this building on this street. Come and see me. You're gonna meet my friend, like my left fist. I remember I saw that video of you.
If you want to punch me, come find me. 40th Street, 2nd Avenue. Let's just say it's not gonna end well. You're gonna meet my friend here.
Yeah. I mean, I would do stuff like that, somewhat for fun and somewhat.
But would people ever show up?
Real? Not really. I mean, like,
no.
Sure you wouldn't think.
It was weird because like I think people, this goes back to like another like theory or thesis I have like that really made sense of like 2015, that experience for me. People who hate things tend to not hate them on a scale of 1 to 10. They hate them with a very low passion. So you see a news article or something like that you don't like, you sort of superficially hate it. The amount of people that superficially hate it is a lot. So you add up the hate units, it's a ton of hate. It's dispersed hate that's not really focused. And that kind of hate, you could change people's minds quickly. It's the hate that's like a 10, where somebody's like, no, I fucking hate this.
It's a personal thing.
Yeah,
dude.
I really don't like this guy specifically. I know everything about him, and I've thought it through, and I really, really don't like this guy. That's the hate that you gotta watch out for. And that's usually happens when you did something really bad. Mm-hmm. And the little hate is sort of like, oh yeah, I saw it. He looks like a jerk. Yeah. But it's not, it doesn't stick because it's not really rooted in something real. It's a painting and it's an act. It's like being an actor. And I enjoyed that, which is why I did stuff like that. And which is why at some point in these interviews, I was like, this person's not going to say something nice about me. Let me play into this. And I enjoyed WWE and stuff like that growing up and still do to some extent. And it was like, okay, you want a bad guy? Like I can be a bad guy. This will be funny, and they'd be like, can you believe what he just said? And I'm like, I'm making fun of it because like I go back to the office and like be like, yo, did you see that interview? And they're like, yeah, man, you or like my brother or something like that. And they'd be like, you really, it's so funny because you're not like that, but I was like, this is 15 minutes of fame. Like I'm going to get a gag out of this. I'm going to put one over on these guys because, it's just sort of fun, like how gullible and sort of stupid some of these people are. But for them, it's catnip because it's like they have to sell pathos, right? Like they have to sell some emotional rise. And I fit really well into that.
I think you leaned into it.
Oh, yeah.
Safe to say. I mean, like that infamous video of you saying, I plead the fifth. I'm going to exercise my right to plead the fifth to every single question that they were asking to you in that courtroom. And also, obviously, the Wu-Tang Clan album. Why do you think that you lean into this like troll or like quote unquote evil person role and you seem to like enjoy it?
Yeah. I mean, it's entertainment. So if you look at, I remember going to a WWE show or, whatever event, and it's not easy to get people to hate you. You can try. The best bad guys in WWE, they're really talented because you can say, all kinds of stuff. But I saw The Rock perform, and The Rock came out. This is in Brooklyn, and he ad-libbed his whole speech. And he spoke for like 30 minutes. Every single person in that stadium was standing up in spellbound because he is that good at what he does, and including myself. And I was just like a kid in a candy store. I was like listening to this grown man, just talking about nothing. But I was just like, this guy's the best. Like that was the feeling I got. And it's an amazing thing to be able to bring that feeling about in somebody. And the opposite's true. If you can get, and they'll troll out a bad guy and they'll have John Cena body slam him or something. But the bad guy comes out, and if he can actually make you feel like, oh, I fucking hate that guy, that's not easy, because it's an act in that case. And in my case, it's an act too. But as I said earlier, I tweeted that, I'm a person of color, and normally that would get people really mad. I'm kind of disappointed that I don't have somebody from the New York Times or Wall Street Journal being like, I'm going to write a piece about this. It doesn't work anymore. So how do you get people to pissed off? And again, I guess, like one of the things of being a rebel and stuff like that is it's a lot of fun. It's always been a lot of fun for me, for somebody who's like, I don't know how to put this, like somebody who's like too wound up or too like their personality is like they take themselves too seriously. Like poking fun at those types of people is a lot of fun for me. And like trying to get someone to lighten up and not take themselves too seriously. And so like whenever you see that dynamic and like somebody's like really strict authoritarian because like they really believe in the rules, they're a hall monitor and stuff like that, it's great to like, just sort of needle that and see that like somebody like fly into a rage over like something completely, benign. And I think like the world's sort of like changed a lot in the last 5 years, that people just don't really react like the way they used to.
So to understand the timeline in its entirety, first of all, as a quick one-word answer, do you think that if you did with Daraprim nowadays, the same thing nowadays, that it would elicit the same exact response? Or do you think it wouldn't have been such a big deal?
No, probably a lot less.
Okay. So to understand the Daraprim thing, you bought this pill, obviously, to everybody with this condition. It's extremely important. There was another drug that could have been brought to light that they can use that's a lot cheaper, but you bought this pill. You raised the price 5,000%. And then was it that ticked off everybody and thought that you were like the most evil person? Or was it the tweet in response to Hillary Clinton calling you out for that?
There's no excuse. Look, we want companies to get a fair return. That's the way our system works. There's no excuse from going from $13.50 to $750 for one pill.
That when you say that, like, I do think it's probably more of a reaction than the actual event. Mm-hmm. And I think the reaction was more potent socially, that I was basically saying these two gigantic parts of society, the media and government, are basically fake, and you don't have to pay attention to them, and you can tell them that they have no power and that they are impervious to you're impervious to their power. And that was a big problem, because if you do that and the media, people start to realize like, oh yeah, the media can write a story about you, but you can show them your middle finger, and so that'll be a bigger story.
How did you show people that?
It's where, things like social media.
So Hillary Clinton, she called you out, and then you responded back on social media.
Yeah.
In such a way that we'll show the tweet right here.
Right, exactly. And what's funny about it is that response is so unusual, because people cower in fear over the media because they can put your name out there. Mm-hmm. And they cower in fear over the government because they throw you in a jail cell. But if you tell both those parties, I don't care, go ahead, do your worst. Mm-hmm. That's like so not emasculating, but that's so like it removes their power, and that's what they demand. You don't go to work for Vice or the New York Times for the money, right? You go to work for those companies because you can write 5 sentences that ruin somebody's life. And you could put those, you have that much power. But if you tell those people, I refuse to let you, have that power over me, write whatever you want.
Then you get hundreds of articles writing you
then
being
they double
the most
down
evil
here.
person in America.
Then they might double down.
Kicking the bee's nest, and they'll do anything they can to not only silence you, but also make an example. Because if you get away with this,
right,
it completely destroys everything that they built up. And if you could get away with it, Jack could get away with it.
Exactly.
I could get away with it.
Exactly.
So they almost have to retaliate in such a way that
it's mandatory.
So do you think that was the reason why
100%.
they found a way to put you in jail?
I started to tell journalists that, if you investigate me, I'll investigate you. And what I did to people is if like their name was, Jack Selby or their name was Matt Stevens, I would buy mattstevens.com. I would just go and GoDaddy, pay $12. I'd buy it. And I'd say, hey, guess what? There's a new website about you. It's called mattstevens.com. And it's got everything about Matt Stevens, including your worst photos, your worst, sift through the photos and be like, there you are, aren't you? Isn't that you?
You have the time to do this. Isn't it better just if they're going to say something, you ignore it?
You do that personally?
You just like...
How much were you worth at the time doing that?
It doesn't matter. I mean, I think that the point is that, the reciprocity and the symmetry is not appreciated.
Do you think that's the same though? I mean, you're like,
it is.
Probably, honestly, it sounds ludicrous, but I think it actually, at its base level, is basically the same exact thing. And if anything, they have more of an audience because it's already a renowned publication.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like you have no problem prying into somebody's personal life, but when somebody does it to you, you are aghast. You are shocked and dismayed that somebody would do that. Why? You do it every day. You do it for a fucking living.
Wouldn't you get further ahead personally had you just focused on something? I know.
I don't think it mattered at all to him, Graham.
I get it, but
you do only live once.
I understand it satisfies like the eye for an eye where, hey, if you're going to poke me, I'm going to poke you right back. And I'm going to do a little more just to, because it's unprovoked here. But to me, it seems like if they poke you, the ideal solution would be, or whatever, I'm just going to keep doing my thing.
There's deterrence as well. It's like, okay, you poke me, be careful how you poke and when you poke and how you do it, because I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. Really want to poke me, then, be prepared for some kind of do it when it makes sense to do it. If you're just doing it just to do it, it's if there's no consequences to a journalist's action, which there aren't.
True.
There's something like, and again, we're seeing that today with Bill Ackman. We're seeing that today with a bunch of other people, Elon and others, where it's a Dave Portnoy. A lot of people feel like they've been railroaded by the media because, again, you don't go to work at New York Times because they're going to pay you a lot. You go to work in New York Times because you love having this power to be able to destroy somebody, or you have more likely a mix of that and some kind of agenda, some kind of mindset about the world that you want to sort of make more of. And again, I don't have a problem with the New York Times, believe it or not. And a lot of people don't like the fact that I kind of like the New York Times because it is actually probably the last place in the world that's like halfway decent journalism. And again, my friends will crucify me for saying this, but that's just how I feel. I think they do a good job. But pick up a copy of the New York Times. It doesn't take long reading the New York Times to realize that there's a fairly deep agenda of what's news, what's good, what's bad. It's filtered through the human lens and an editor lens. The editors turn out to be far more important than the reporters. We tend to give the reporters a lot of flack. It turns out that the editors tell the reporters what to write about, and they write the headlines, and they change the piece to see how they fit. And those people never get really in the spotlight. There are people in the back that you don't hear about, and it's one of the kind of misunderstood features of media that it's the editor really calling the shots here. And the editors have this view that they can shape the way the world perceives, I guess the way people perceive the world just through what they write about, just through how they talk about it. And that's true. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of power. If you're able to tell the world, okay, this is how you should look at things. This is the lens through you should examine the current state of affairs. It's a big deal, and I think that to tell somebody like that, well, nowadays, one of my tweets reaches more people than one of your articles. One of Elon's tweets reaches a lot more than any of those articles. So how do you compete with that? You can't. And that's why, when you say that you can't affect me, you're telling the truth. You're basically saying, so every time I get an interview request or from a newspaper or something like that, do you have a quote on this? If I had a quote on this, I would tweet about it. I don't need you to propagate my quote.
So who did you upset to go to jail?
That's a good question. And I think it's more complicated than the standard line of some deep shadowy person got angry at you and therefore you went to jail. I do think, and my very experienced criminal defense attorney, who's just a fantastic person in general, Ben Brafman, he says you wouldn't have gone to jail if you kept your mouth shut and you didn't raise the price of a drug, or you didn't defend yourself for raising the price of a drug. You probably would have been fine, even if you raised the price, but you just backed down, you would have been fine. I think that the meta of there's allegations that I committed an actual crime, and I was found guilty of 3 of those 8 accusations.
What were those 3? by the way?
Yes, the securities fraud. But I'm so proud of the 5, that we got acquitted of, because you never get acquitted of anything. Like, you always convicted of every charge. Elizabeth Holmes got off on a couple as well. SBF, guilty on all counts. It's almost always you're guilty on all counts. So the fact that we got majority acquitted was like such a big win, because I'm like, I didn't do any of this bullshit. And the 3 were related to a hedge fund that I managed. And it was just a lot of people in the hedge fund industry who know the industry are like, I wouldn't have convicted you for that.
Is it common practice, whatever fraud activity that you did within this?
I would say no. I'm not saying that I'm 100% innocent, but I don't think what I did rose to the level of a crime. I think it was like bad paperwork, sloppy, but not like overtly dishonest or
Can you say what it is exactly?
Not really, because
was?
This was like, it was such a, the way these laws are written up, it's like kind of amorphous. It was just sort of lying to investors. And it doesn't matter if you make them a lot of money, but if you lie in any way, shape, or form, you're guilty technically of security.
What did they say the lie was?
There was a number of little ones that all kind of added up to a general kind of like sense of lying. But again, if you make a lot of money, I think that every time you buy a stock, you're listening to a conference call, like there's something in there that's false. Like there just always is, or will prove to be false or something like that. But you generally have a little bit of safe harbor around kind of like, well, statements I make may not turn out to be true. Statements I make, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't really matter. The way the law is constructed is they push a button and you're found guilty. That's it. There's no real, this facade that there's like due process and all that stuff is nonsense.
So do you think they threw a whole bunch at the wall and then they said, well, now we can investigate and we're going to find something on one of these? So we have enough where we're going to dig something up.
No, I think that there was, I think it's tempting to want to believe that, and that makes me look the best. But I think the reality is like all business people have some regulatory or government pressure of some kind, and right now Elon's got like coming from everywhere. But even Warren Buffett, if you look at his book, Snowball, the book about him, he had an SEC investigation. I mean, he thought he was going to jail. And he's like supposed to be the most honest business person of all time. Jack Ma wrote that Bill Gates said something positive about Alibaba in Alibaba's early days. He did not. He never met Bill Gates. He said, when confronted about it, he said, I think it was something Bill Gates would say if he knew who I was. Could you imagine doing that? That's securities fraud, 100%, right?
That's securities fraud.
100%. You
And
can't
you can
make
go
up
to
that Bill Gates endorsed you.
Federal prison
Absolutely.
for that.
You make up
For a
that Bill
publicly
Gates
traded company? Oh, yeah. It's
or
big news.
I
Yeah.
mean, if somebody was influenced by Bill Gates' fake endorsement of you, which is possible, you've lied to somebody in essence.
So essentially you lied to the investors about how you were investing the money or something like that. But this is what you've said in interviews. They still got the returns that they would have loved to get.
Yeah, they got some of the best returns, yeah.
You famously claim that you still get Christmas cards from a lot of the investors that you had.
I mean,
was there a single investor that was upset with what you did?
Yeah.
So there were investors that were upset.
Yep. It's hedge fund investors are hard to please. They're generally very, very wealthy people that, are, they can be very picky. They can be very hard to please. But, again, I think that it's something that, I've moved on from, because ultimately you can indict anyone for anything. And the president, former president, Donald Trump, is 4 different indictments of 4 different crimes in 4 different places, which I've met some of the craziest criminals you'll ever know, between mob bosses to cartel to, Bloods, Crips, you name it, every gang in the country, to masterminds of, fraud and theft and computer hacking and stuff like that. I've never met a single person that has 4 separate indictments. There's 4 separate places. And I think this has laid bare the justice system. Like, this is going to collapse basically the justice system one way or another.
What predictions do you have for the justice system?
Well, unfortunately, so there's a couple of problems here. I do think they're at some point going to try to put the former president in prison, which is really unfortunate. Now, he does seem to be doing a fantastic job, and I'm rooting for him, to be clear, of beating the charges, which is surprising because it's hard to do. But he has 2 state cases and 2 Fed cases. State's easier than Fed. but he has one Fed case that looks really bad. But he seems to have found that the prosecutor of the case, I think that's a state case actually, in one of his state cases, his prosecutor, which is the case they kind of have him dead to rights on, the prosecutor is actually, has been doing something bad herself. This is actually one of the best ways to get a case thrown out, is when you show that if I'm such a bad guy, look at them, they're committing crime too. And I actually had this in my own case where we found that our prosecutor was talking and revealing details of the case to a journalist. And that's illegal. It's illegal in the United States of America for a U.S. attorney to reveal grand jury testimony and grand jury minutes to anyone. How did I know that this happened? I dated the girl.
You dated the journalist?
It's a big thing in Elle magazine. Yeah. When we broke up, I dated Christy, and she was the Bloomberg reporter about me, and we fell in love. And she told me,
how would she be writing these negative articles on you, though?
She was getting fed data from the prosecutor.
But you guys weren't dating at the time.
No.
This was after. Wow.
And so her editors hated me. They pressured her to write more and more negative articles. She started to push back and say, actually, I'm not sure this story is 100%. He's the bad guy.
She's like, man, he's kind of cute.
I like that smile. Yeah.
But regardless, like they pressured her so much that inevitably they kind of fired her. And, we had our thing, but that was actually found. This tidbit was found by somebody else in a separate case where the guy did the same thing. And the Attorney General of Philadelphia went to jail for this. You cannot call the media and say, hey, I'm about to indict Jack. Do you know that? We're going to be at his house at 6 a.m. Make sure the cameras are there because, they're sending the SWAT team because, he's dangerous. And they sent the SWAT team for Roger Stone. They sent the SWAT team for me. It's like, what's Navy SEAL Team 6 doing here? Well, it's not a SWAT team, but, it's guys with guns. It's 12 guys.
What was that like? Did they just straight up bust through the door?
So they have a door buster, but they ring the bell.
That's just in case.
It's so
resting on their arm right beside. Okay.
I was imagining like straight up throwing like
SWAT.
stun grenades
they do
from the
for some
window.
people. They do it for drug dealers,
But for you, they rang the bell. They politely knock.
It's like, and it's 6 a.m. And it's like, look, all you have to do is call the lawyer and say, we've made the decision. We are going to indict Mr. Shkreli. Please report to, the judge's office 8 a.m. Mm-hmm. And there wouldn't be 100 cameras. There wouldn't be the shock and awe of being arrested at 6 a.m. by 12 fucking FBI agents.
That was a big show.
Well, it's a show, and it's supposed to scare you into pleading guilty. It's supposed to scare you it's supposed to embarrass you. It's supposed to cause all this collateral damage. It's to poison the jury pool so that when you actually if you do fight the case, which nobody does, you go to trial and everybody knows you're already, kind of bad guy. It's a system that just doesn't work. I mean, 99% of federal cases get convictions, 99%. In state, in Baltimore, it's actually close to 50-50 now. In New York and other states, it's like 60, 70. It's not good chances, but it's not 99%. I dare you to try to find an actual acquittal where somebody said not guilty. It's almost impossible. And it's just a system that doesn't really make sense. And I think that now we're starting to see that pressing a button is a guarantee of conviction. And fighting it makes it worse, which is something that Alan Dershowitz, who's this very important attorney, but also was Epstein's attorney, and OJ's attorney, has been writing a lot of academic articles about that. If you actually go to trial to challenge your conviction or your soon to be conviction, that you end up getting a much worse punishment, and because you're wasting the time of the government and the judicial resources, which is just wow. This is what they do in Russia and China. Like this is not government's not always right, and unfortunately for whatever reason, like we've evolved this system of like. The prosecutor becomes famous because they get to go in front of the podium. They say, today we arrested President Trump, blah, blah, blah. And that woman from the Attorney General of Georgia is very famous now. Fannie, I forget her last name, but because she's the prosecutor, our Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, who I've done a lot of battle with, she's famous now too. And she has a chance of becoming, guess what? The governor. And she's AG as Attorney General, but it's also aspiring governor because, she actually did run for governor briefly, but Kathy Hochul had it in the bag, so she quit. But eventually she's going to run for governor again. How do you get the celebrity to run for governor? Well, if you're the big top cop and you beat up all the bad guys, like Donald Trump and Martin Shkreli and the NRA and folks like that, well, oh yeah, I like that lady. She's good. Let's make her governor. That's the way that, she gets publicity. And it's sad because, it's like not about justice. We have a lot of homelessness. We have a lot of crime. We got a lot of issues in New York. And she could be focused on that, but she's focused inward on, well, as a governor, I'm in charge of a lot of people. I'm going to make a lot of money. Why do I care about crime? Fuck
Some
crime.
of it, I feel like you said, is publicity. It's what's going to get the most attention. And if you're marketing yourself, fixing homelessness is not going to get you the same attention as going after that big guy that everyone is talking about. That's going to get you in the media outlets.
Oh, especially if people in this state, not all of the state, but certainly in parts of New York, don't like Trump, even though he's from here. And people like him, kind of built New York. But regardless, a lot of people don't like him. Sure, I mean, being the person that arrested Trump, you're a great person to those people and those voters, and versus some anonymous person you never heard of, who's going to get the votes? So, of course, I think that dishonesty is coming to fruition. Like a lot of the backhanded and kind of sloppy ways that some of these prosecutors have put together these cases have more and more been is this really fair? Is this the way we should be doing justice? Arrest the person who's unpopular? Is that really justice supposed to be blind? It's supposed to be no, this is going to be fair no matter what. And it tends to not be the way it works. But again, I have the strength to say, I'll take jail on full force. I have the strength to say, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Screw it.
What was your initial reaction going to jail?
I was optimistic,
Was there not any part of you that was scared or nervous or thinking,
not scared, but certainly nervous and frustrated, not scared. I tend to not get scared. But the annoyed for sure, frustrated that I was there, feeling out of place. I grew up in the inner city in Brooklyn, and I felt like I returned. I basically felt like I was in the hood again. And the good thing is that wasn't new to me. A lot of rich white guys go to jail and they're just fucking petrified because it's I've never been around black people before or something like that. And it's I'm just going back to my roots. This is easy. And within half an hour I was playing chess and yakking it up with dudes and doing fine.
So you would say it was an enjoyable experience or something that
I wouldn't say it was enjoyable. You can find enjoyment from it.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's a terrible experience, to be clear. But
Okay.
if you let it get you down, it's going to be much worse.
Do you ever miss jail?
That's a really tough one. I think about that sometimes. I would say no, but there are accidental byproducts of prison that are good. I was talking to one of the world's biggest investors about this. This is a person who loves to read and just locks himself away and reads all day. And I said that, that's what I got to do in prison. I read hundreds of books and it was great. I didn't like other things, but that part I liked. And today, since I've been home, I've not read, I don't think, one book cover to cover. That's just the nature of the society we live in, where we have phones buzzing and things distracting us. And, you really sit there and read cover to cover, page to page, a full 200, 300, 400 page book. And it's no, you don't have time for it.
Is it dangerous at all? Because you hear a lot of the stories of people who go to jail and they say, oh, I saw someone get killed in front of me and I've seen all these fights and you kind of got to stay to yourself. Is there truth to that, or is it just dependent on where you are?
There's truth to that. I think it's kind of one of these things where you can find danger anywhere. If I look at the last 6 years, the most dangerous situation I was in was probably on the subway station 6 months ago or something like that. It's not, something in prison. If you act like an idiot, you're going to win idiot prizes. It's, and you could do that anywhere. There's no guns in there. There's guns out here. There's no, it's for a lot of people in gangs, especially, which obviously I'm not that kind of person, but for people in gangs, jail's actually the safe place. You get killed out there. They'll shoot you. Inside jail, you're kind of protected by the system. There's cops around at all times. Doesn't mean you can't get hurt, but it sort of means that you're not in the same Wild West. It's sort of like time out for gangsters. You play cards, watch TV, work out, read books if you're like me.
Do you still keep in touch with any of your prison mates?
So according to probation, I'm not allowed to technically. It's not a rule they care that much about, but technically you're not allowed to maintain contact.
What happened on the subway 6 months ago?
Nothing special. It's New York City subway.
It's subway, yes.
I hate it when there's some belligerent person on the subway and I look at as a situation that happened. Old Chinese lady sitting next to me starts grabbing her purse and shrinking down. I'm like, you shouldn't be afraid to take the subway, and the more guys that don't I'm no superhero, but like every guy, every like red-blooded man has to do their part to be like, no, I'm not going to let you terrorize this old lady, who's like, looks like she's about to, have a heart attack. You got to do something as a man. And, it's just a frustrating thing to sort of see that. And, a lot of people say it's not my problem. It's not my problem. And yeah, there's stories every now and then where you make it your problem and you get shot, it's a terrible thing, but ultimately like, it's frustrating to see what's happened to, New York and San Fran and other places, Chicago, where it's like, look, the crazy people are running the city. And it's, San Fran, I mean, you park your car for 5 minutes, someone's breaking into it. It's like, why do we let this happen? And the answer is like, we can't all become police ourselves. I don't think that's the right solution, but we also can't do nothing. The idea that we have to lock up, grocery stores, we have to lock up like deodorant.
Not even just
somebody had to steal.
Lock them up. They're shutting down.
Right.
I think Target was one of those in San Francisco.
They should.
Straight up, they said, we have too many people stealing stuff from our store, and so it's unprofitable for us to be here, so we're just going to leave.
Yeah, the margins are low enough that if you lose one product at 100% gross margin, the rest of your gross margin is 10%, that every one good that's stolen you lose the money of 10 goods that would have that you would have sold. So pretty terrible thing. And again, who am I to fix society? But I think it's like, just sad to see. And again, there's a lot of like this return to like masculinity. And I never thought I'd be like somebody that could represent that. But I do think like in a lot of ways, this return to like normative behavior is something that, there was this era of like toxic masculinity. And like, you don't hear about it anymore because it's like, actually it's kind of something that, a little bit of masculinity isn't so bad. And whether that's challenging authority or standing up to somebody who's bullying you or whatever, I think that more and more you're seeing that return and getting back to normalcy and getting back to kind of the place we were before, which I think is good.
I have a question on Big Pharma. A lot of people have speculated that there are plenty of different drug companies that have solutions for chronic illnesses, but prevent the solutions from ever being public since medication for the rest of your life is more profitable. Is this actually the case for some of Big Pharma?
No, and I think this is like the dumbest, craziest conspiracy theory.
A lot of people talk about it.
A lot of people do. And
I've heard that.
It's so nuts.
The same thing.
Yeah. I mean, if you ever did a little bit of science, you learn that like it doesn't go that well.
So it's just an objective no as a response.
Like there's that theory that like, they've cured cancer, but they don't want to come out with it yet because they still have money to be
I don't know.
made
I think you can say stuff that sounds like a conspiracy until it's proved true by some random person somewhere.
Sometimes.
And the thing is, this has happened a lot.
The problem is it sounds believable enough.
Yeah.
That someone would have a cure, but
especially in the wake of everything going on.
Or maybe they're trying to shop it around.
What's interesting is if you don't know the industry, it could make more sense than it does. So the drug industry has about 1,000 companies in it. And drug company 22 does not give a flying fuck about drug company 1 or 2 or 3. Number 1 is Johnson & Johnson. Pfizer's like number 8 now, as they've kind of fucked up. But like, let's say Merck's working on a cancer drug and it would hurt Pfizer a lot because it would be a one-time cure. And this actually happened. Gilead is a company in California. They made the Hep C cure. There was a company that was going to lose out a lot because they sold more of a chronic treatment for Hep C. Gilead didn't give a shit that that company would get hurt. They put out their cure ASAP and they made a ton of money. It was actually one of the best selling drugs of all time because if you have a cure, you can price it higher as if it was going to be used for
a lifetime.
Yeah. And then you see that a lot these days where drug companies aren't stupid. So the central premise of you make more money in chronic versus acute is wrong. The drug I was talking about earlier is $2.3 million. It's called Zolgensma.
Yeah.
How many doses do you have to take Zolgensma? Fun. It's a gene therapy. It rewrites the DNA in your genes. So it fixes you and you never need it again. But they pay $2.3 million and they actually set up an installment payment with some of the insurance companies where it's like, look, if you want to pay $200,000 a year for 10 years, we'll do that. But you're paying $2.3 million one way or the other. And, there's the hunt. The reason I don't like it this much is obviously not true, but it's very insulting to the people that work at drug companies who all have the diseases, their family members, et cetera. A lot of people get into the industry to make a difference. And Alzheimer's is one of these diseases that's going to, I mean, we're starting to cure cancer for real and heart disease and things like that. What's left is something like Alzheimer's, something like these terrible genetic diseases. But after that, I don't even see a future for pharma where it's like, look, our problems are solved, you know?
Couldn't certain genes continue to mutate so you have to continue to keep up with medications, or maybe viruses are able to mutate and new things come up?
Infectious disease probably will never be, you know, fully solved. But like, if you think about something like heart disease, there haven't been a lot of new medicines for a long time, because if you have high blood pressure, man, there's like 65 ways to lower it through drugs. If you have high cholesterol, there's a lot of ways. It's not really a lot left to do there, you know? The same thing applies in some of these other illnesses, like autoimmune. At this point, we've got like 50 kinds of autoimmune drugs. You got autoimmune disease, you know, we wipe out your B cells, your T cells, your this or that. I mean, there's a way to do it. Same thing with derm, same thing with eye medicine. Like, there's just not much left.
I feel like allergies would be a big one, like a peanut allergy. Imagine they came up with a cure.
There are medicines for that. You know,
but a cure.
Yeah, it's tough. They're working on those too, but like there's such slim pickings left. Like Alzheimer's is like this big central big problem that has no real treatment yet. That's the one that I think is going to be like pharma's last hurrah. And then after that, it's like you see Lilly with and Lilly and Novo with their GLP-1s like Ozempic. And this is like a cosmetic thing more than a medical thing. And I think you're going to see more of that happening. But ultimately, like pharma, the people that work at pharma, the scientists that publish papers, they're researching really difficult stuff, and they write papers and they publish them. And they went to school and they're doing really tough experiments. Some of these clinical trials cost $100 million. It's kind of insulting to those people to say like, or you're like somehow like not being forthright about your work, because a lot of it is out in the sort of open and like put out there, and like in patents, you can look at the data that they won over a patent. And you're fighting so hard to make these medicines that it'd be very weird to succeed in making one and then not put it out. It'd be like, well, we want to make money. And these companies are very short-sighted, because the owners are they're all publicly traded. So there's no one family that's like, oh, we're making more money this way, so let's not, put it out. It's all publicly traded. The board of directors aren't even stockholders. The CEO gets paid based on earnings per share for this year and next year. So they actually put out more medicines maybe than they like. Just the opposite incentive exists for them to put out as many medicines as they can in the near term. And they'd rather, blow out earnings this year, next year than actually, hurt earnings. They don't care about earnings in the long run, because they won't be there for the long run.
Yeah. Did you get the COVID vaccine?
I did.
And how much confidence did you have in it at the time? How much confidence do you have in it now?
Yeah, great questions. So I know a lot about medicine, I think. I had confidence in it then. I still have some confidence in it now. The thing about public health is it's like this different branch of medicine. So if we took a blood pressure medicine that was new, and we gave 50 people or 500 people or 5,000 people like you the drug, we didn't tell you whether it was drug or placebo, and we gave the same amount of people like you placebo, at the end of the study, we could figure out, okay, you didn't have blood pressure reduction. You had 10 millimeters systolic reduction. And drug gets approved. And it's very reasonable to believe that this drug creates a 10 millimeter systolic blood pressure reduction. That's a system of medicine we've had for so long. And it works. It's evidence-based medicine. It's an experiment. Public health's different. The problem with public health is that it doesn't work this way. So you can prove, which I believe they did, that the vaccine works. And they proved it in a clinical trial. Far less people got COVID when they got the vaccine than didn't. And unless there's a conspiracy that I can't even conjure in my mind, and remember, I've been to jail, it's very hard for me to imagine that two different sets of companies, remember, Moderna did one and Pfizer and BioNTech did one, they got the same result. Is it possible that they made it up? It's possible. But everything I know about medicine says this thing was real. But unfortunately, in public health, that's not the end of the story. They received the vaccine. A lot less of them got infected. Less of them got hospitalized, et cetera, et cetera. But what does that mean from then on? And if you were willing to stop the conversation at that point, then I don't think you could argue it. But what most people who don't like the COVID vaccine do is they want to talk about what comes after, which is important, but it's a different discussion. So we talk about the first half of it is, are the clinical trials that were published in the New England Journal that were run by BioNTech and run by Moderna, are they reliable, credible, real? I think the answer is yes. And I haven't yet to hear somebody that has had a plausible reason why those trials didn't work. All the stuff I hear about comes about after, which is, okay, the vaccine worked in that trial. The real world is not a clinical trial. The real world is far more complex and far much larger. And vaccines can only really work if everyone takes them. And they can only really work if everyone takes them kind of quickly. And they may still not work if that happens, because the flu vaccine, for example, it was notoriously unreliable.
Right.
And so vaccines and epidemiology and public health are like just more amorphous than we deal with like a blood pressure where it's like straight shot. Like, if you didn't have that blood pressure reduction, it'd be very weird, whereas in vaccines, you take the flu shot, you just look at the flu. That's very common. And some years it's better or worse than others, depending on the viral mutation. COVID's a weird one. Every virus is different. The one thing I could say, like, with almost certainty that I think that is counter consensus, forget about like the efficacy side for a second. The safety side, I don't think there's any safety problem with the COVID vaccine whatsoever. And this comes from a view of the mechanistic science of it. You get this very, very, very small amount of nucleic acids. So in this case, RNA, might as well be DNA. It's almost the exact same thing. You get this extremely small amount. It's like nanograms amount of DNA. It's impossible to even visualize if it were made solid. It wouldn't even be a crumb of anything. And that's injected into you. And one time. Not for the rest of your life, not every day, one time. So you just think about the scope of it as like, could this be dangerous? We do a lot of things in our life that are a little more dangerous than that. But let's say it might be dangerous. DNA is an extremely fragile molecule. It does not survive very long in any setting. And that's why many people, like including me, have been skeptical about mRNA and DNA medicines. In fact, they were the laughingstock of the industry for a long time. When Moderna was developing this trial, I was following it very closely. There's no way this fucking works. The DNA is just it disintegrates so fast. The body just is such a gauntlet of shit attacking it that there's no way the bonds that bond nucleic acids are very weak, notoriously weak. They'll just come apart. And like this whole thing is like trying to land a rocket ship on the moon, with a rocket ship made of, paper. It's just not going to happen. And, they did it and it was amazing. But it didn't work the way everyone wanted it to, obviously. And I think there was a politicalization of this, which is like really scary because you had this like seeming divide between right wing and left wing. And even seeming divide.
It becomes such a political issue.
That was
surprising to me. It should have been a medical issue and not a right or left.
I do think there's some amount of like freedom of like, I can decide for me what's right for me. And I think that's probably, and I think it's definitely the way it should be. And it's the way it is, right? Which is the funnier part. And then people said, no, I felt pressured by my employer, or I felt pressured by whatever that I had to take it. And, nobody will ever strap you down and say, you got to take this drug. And I think that's good. But, the employer pressure and stuff like that is a little weird. Although I look at measles and mumps and things like that and say like those diseases were eradicated by vaccines. And so we know a lot about vaccines and they don't really cause long-term damage. I just don't think they do. And if you think about the actual mechanism of it, how they work, so you don't have any evidence that they cause a problem. And I know there's a lot of people that think they all of a sudden are medical experts and, they know how to look at medical data. Medical data is one of these things I've been looking at for 20 years. And it's easy to make the wrong conclusion from looking at medical data. It's very easy. There's so many times where you think a drug is going to work and it doesn't, or vice versa, that you learn over time how to really understand this data. So if you see something like myocarditis or something like that, and you're tempted to think, oh, well, this must be happening because of the COVID vaccine. There's hundreds of different explanations as to what could be going on. And if you want to read a biostatistics textbook, I have some recommendations, but it's very easy. There are many stories of being lured into the wrong analysis. And again, like if you're a statistics pro, go ahead and lay out your case. But I think that, it's just not there. And the science behind it, not only is the data not there, but the science doesn't make sense. How a very, very small amount of this very fragile molecule could somehow result in this really long-term problem. It doesn't sort of make sense. And the other thing about it that I think is important is that like, can't really do anything about it. We've sort of gone through this exercise, doing the best we could, President Trump was a big fan of the vaccine, for what it's worth, even though this became a political thing. He's on record saying that he saved millions of lives with the vaccine. And then kind of, people are flip-flopping a little bit. Can't change the past. Ultimately, it was the most studied vaccine maybe of all time.
So why do people believe that there was like a tracking device in it? Like Bill Gates was somehow like, how do people come to that conclusion?
I think there's a conspiracy. There's a world where I was actually writing an article about this. I lost the interest in writing it. I called it on apophenia. Apophenia is like a psychological term. It's very unknown that people want to believe in things and they start to force themselves into doing it. And astrology is the best example, where there's like no conceivable world where what happens in Jupiter is going to influence your personality here on Earth. Like it just does not stand to reason under any like possible physical reality. But people read the horoscope and people believe that the stars control our fate. And it sounds very romantic and cool, but it's just not true. And superstitions and conspiracy theories are a way to explain the world that we live in a way that, makes us more comfortable, makes us more at ease. And also they help our egos. Don't you know that the COVID vaccine doesn't work? Oh, you don't know that yet. Wait till you see this. And it makes you feel smarter. It makes you feel better. Oh, you didn't know about Epstein Island. I knew. I warned you. There's things like that it's just like, there's a whole litany of these like psychological explanations for why do people feel the need to like create this in-group of like me and my people in the know. We know UFOs exist. And you guys, you don't know yet. But when we let you know the secret information, you're going to know. And it's funny, but it's also something we do unconsciously. I mean, we look down at people that don't know yet, this or that. And I think that kind of thing that happens on both sides. Like the COVID vaccine people are, don't you know the science? Don't you know this and that? And then the anti-people are like, oh, don't you know that it's causing myocarditis? And it's this fight that isn't trying to find the truth. It's just trying to find and foist arrogance on people. Like, I'm better than you. I'm smarter than you. I'm wearing a mask. And it's like, well, maybe you are, maybe you're not, but does it help or not is what it's important, not the personalities and the, kind of like fighting over, this territory. And I think in times of uncertainty in society, it's actually been shown that people get more interested in conspiracy theories when there's more uncertainty, that when the world is changing a lot and there's wars or there's depressions, people sort of turn to these other ways to explain the world other than like, especially when people personally are going through something difficult, they tend to believe in conspiracies. They tend to they want to search for other explanations that explain their misfortune or explain something else. It's natural to do and it's alarming, but right now we have like the greatest era ever for conspiracy theories. And people are believing and re-examining things that have been put to bed. They're starting to re-examine them and wonder about them.
Reminds you of the World Economic Forum.
One of the craziest ones.
Coming together with the Great Reset.
My favorite is Bill Gates, who, I don't know him, but I have some friends that know like his daily schedule. This guy does not give a fuck about any of the stuff that, you guys are talking about. Last I heard, he has a new girlfriend. It's very young. And not that young.
He likes him young, right?
Right. No, normal age. And like his mind on like the world state of affairs and like vaccines is completely out of his like zone. Like he's trying to party with his girlfriend. Like
that seems like a common billionaire theme now.
Yeah, Soros is another one.
Oh, I was thinking Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
Is you just seem to enter a party phase. We're going to see him get buffed pretty soon.
Like Bill Gates
get
is
a
getting
6-pack and
right. But no, like he's experimenting with drugs. I heard like he's like he's doing some of the things that he's never been able to do in his life because Microsoft is.
I mean, makes sense, right?
I mean, yeah, sure. Yeah. What else would he be doing?
Controlling the world. Like he's got enough money, man. He don't give a fuck. Like, what do you think he's going to spend this money on? He'll be dead in 30 years, and like all of us. And I think like this temptation to like make him a boogeyman is just like bizarre, because like Soros is another one where it's like, he's a hedge fund king, so he get a lot of like mutual connections or whatever. That guy doesn't care, And I saw Alex Jones is now pinning it on his son, Alex Soros, who's also a perfectly nice guy and. Really, I think could not care less. Yeah, I mean, these people have their opinions. I mean, they're not, my opinions necessarily, but they're allowed to have them and they're allowed to advocate for them. And I think that doesn't make them puppet masters. One thing I've learned about money in politics is that when you give money to a politician, the person giving the money thinks they just bought the politician, but the politician thinks they just suckered the guy giving the money. And both guys think they got over on each other and nothing's going to happen. And it's this like stupid game that when rich people have too much money, it's one of the things they do because you got too much money. You got to throw it somewhere. And you feel important when you do it. And you're hosting a party tonight for Mitt Romney, or you're, going back a couple cycles ago, or Nikki Haley's going to, be doing a fundraiser at my house and it's $50,000 a plate. And, that's that. Okay. You feel important, you feel special, but your money is now not yours. And more likely than not, she's not going to be president and your money just went down the tubes, but you don't really care. It is what it is. And I think that like the idea that like some of these people are like really puppet masters, they're really controlling things and so forth. It's a great story, but it evokes that pathos, but it's just as fake as the WWE guy hitting somebody with a chair. It's a better story than it is a reality. And if money people could control politicians, they'd love to. And I think some of them even delude themselves into thinking they can do it. But the smarter guys, like Bill Gates, doesn't give money to politicians. He knows they're going to listen to him. Warren Buffett never did it either. Some of the guys that do it are some of the most like desperate, some of the most like they're not self-confident.
So do you think it's a need to feel liked?
Yeah. It's sort of like one of these things.
I
was the biggest donor to the so-and-so campaign. And it's like, yeah, nobody cares, but the people that do it are generally doing it for that reason. There are some people that are like, they really believe that the world's coming to a fucking end. And like, unless they give money to Donald Trump today, that,
he's going to save the world.
He's going to save the world.
Yeah.
And look, I admire some of those people that, they're convinced that AOC is going to save the world or Donald Trump's going to save the world or whomever. And like, they're really passionate about it. Look, fine. It's not me. And I think that no matter who's in office, I tend to think like, everything's going to be fine in the end as the people sort of decide like, what matters and our voices are heard. Like, I don't think like politicians are not as stupid as they look. Like if they hear everyone's out there kind of like anti-woke right now, which is kind of what's happening, they back off on the woke stuff pretty fast. Like, they want to stay in power. They're not going to sit there and start trumping up, that stuff. I mean, it's now consensus to be anti-woke. I was doing it before it was cool. And, it's so cool now that I want to do the opposite. I want to be woke and I want to start, using pronouns and, start hitting people hard with microaggressions, stop doing that, because like, again, it's so mainstream, to be like edgy and red pilled and like an edgelord that it's like boring. Like I've had 2 different ex-girlfriends become red pilled and become like conservative influencers in the last like year because it's that hot. It's that like, the audience is there and the content is there and like people are excited about it. And it's like, yeah, I get it, but
yeah.
It's such a stupid trend.
But I have noticed a big swing now towards a more traditional lifestyle and belief. It seems as though that's permeating social media a lot in the last year.
It's not a bad
The whole like trad wife movement
Sure.
and all of this is really, I think it's striking a chord for people who say, I don't want to just do the status quo, what everyone has been telling me for the last 20 years. Let's go back to a time where maybe things were simpler.
I think it's a good idea. And one of the funny things that COVID taught us, I think, is that productivity is so high right now that we could actually shut down the world and still be fine. We could actually shut down the world and the stock market would go up. It was like unbelievable. Yeah. Like I'm sitting there thinking like, how'd this happen? How do we have record unemployment that's, at the lowest unemployment ever? Like, how did that happen when we shut the world down? And the answer is like, we're such a digital world now. We're so, productive in finding places to put work that, it's like the economy's so unstoppable that you could actually, this dovetails with another crazy sort of thing I've noticed, which is in media. This affects you guys as anyone else. Between Netflix and Disney and Hulu and like every streaming service and the amount of content that's been produced, no matter how much content we produce, it seems to be able to be consumed. If you told me that there'd be a TikTok, if you told me there'd be, an infinite number of these sort of new services and podcast content would go up 10x or 20x and that there'd still be customers for all of it, I'd say it's impossible. Where's the time coming from? It has to come from somewhere, like somebody has to lose TV revenue, something's to give. And it just seems like we have more and more time to consume this content. We're binge watching and stuff like that. And it's like, where do people get the time? And the answer is like, truth be told, like actual like 40-hour work week is sort of like starting to, if you want to make a living and like work as little as possible, you kind of can. And you can kind of be a person that just sort of lounges and watches TV all day or consumes content all day and still get it by. And content creators, not to cast any aspersions, that you guys are very successful, but the dream of being able to go on YouTube and bullshit all day. And,
I love that, man. That's my favorite part.
It's so cool.
Man.
But like to be able to do that for my work, how do I make ends meet? 2 hours a day, go on YouTube, stream, and my bills get paid. And it's like, you couldn't do that before. In the 20s, you had to work 2 shifts in a factory, blood, sweat, and tears. And then that slowly changed. Okay, I'm going to sit in an office. And if you've ever had an office job, you know that, a good chunk of your office job is bullshitting at the water cooler, talking to Deborah in accounting, you're just kind of not doing much. And then, when it comes time to work, you work, you go to a meeting, you don't do much in the meeting. And now it's gotten to the point where it's like, okay, remote work. Now you just don't do all that except you're at home. You don't do even less. And like the fact that this could sustain itself is something that, is fascinating. And it shows that like we actually could have more time for families. We could have more time for some of these things if we actually like reprioritized kind of what it is we're after. But
do you think people are actually going to use that time effectively?
Probably not, right? I mean, that's I examine my own life. I was just talking about this with somebody. It's so often the things that you need to do, you don't actually do. You kind of postpone and you do other things. And like video games is another example where like it's a form of content. And video game playing has also increased like, fairly dramatically. Games like League of Legends and others have, taken a huge amount of our time. And where does that time come from? Again, it's sort of like a very weird thing. And one of the places it's coming from is probably social interaction, where the amount of like face-to-face communication people actually do is dropping to, bare minimum. And, it's not good for society as a whole and fertility and things like that, which is like every business person's pet project now.
Do you seem to worry about the population problem? It seems as though a lot of billionaires, that's what they're concerned about. That people are not having as much kids. Yeah, no, that's what everyone's talking about. And one of the things that I'm in a chat room with like, the Illuminati. And one of the things secret Illuminati meeting we're talking about is this problem. And the real scary part to a lot of Illuminati members, not me, is that if you look at where population is growing and you look at where population is shrinking and you extrapolate, in 50 years, like most of the world is going to be African and Asian. And to a lot of people in the Illuminati, it's a little worrisome, because if you actually look by religion, it's going to be very much Islamic. And that's, again, something where are you ready to deal with a world that's majority African, Asian, and Islamic and Middle Eastern? And those are the only countries that are actually growing dramatically in population, while we actually may be shrinking. Why do you think that is?
It's past my pay grade, but I think that it is something that people are looking at and interested. I'm not a sociologist.
It seems as though Americans are deprioritizing family and kids.
Yes.
It seems as though people are also having kids later.
Yeah, no, all that's true.
Fewer of them.
But are we looking in the rearview mirror and not the forward? I mean, I don't know. I think Elon is doing his part about talking about this. I think there's some natural biological realities of like, you can only have kids up to a certain age at the end of the day. And for whatever reason, it's a problem. I actually don't think, we didn't talk much about what I'm doing today, but I'm in software. In some ways, I've been in software my whole life. And I work on AI. And I actually think that we're going to start to think about AIs as people and that our population decline won't be a problem because while the human population may decline, the AI population will grow dramatically. And that the United States of America, for example, will have 300 million or so people today. And maybe if you fast forward 100 years, it'll be 200 million humans, but maybe a billion AIs. And we'll have 1.2 billion people in the US. And that's the way we'll think about people. As weird as it sounds, we're not used to thinking of people that way.
But AI wouldn't consume the same a person would. So they might not need, let's say, an iPhone. They might not need food. They might not need to buy clothing and participate in the same ways. They might help production.
Yeah, it's weird because I was doing some calculations with some of the other AI people. And I think if you wanted like a full AI, like equivalent person, my calculation was it cost about $15 million a year to get the computer that you would need, like the football field of computers you would need. And like we have such a football field, and other companies have even bigger football fields, and that cost is going to go down, obviously, right? But can you use more processing to gain even more, effectiveness or whatever you want to call it, And I think that you're going to find people like I even saw a Reddit post the other day, so it's coming true faster than slower. That a couple of parents said, my son came to me and said, I'm in a relationship with a machine. And the parents didn't know what to do. And it sounds hilarious today, but it's not going to be hilarious 10 years from now.
What was the Is that just one of those AI
replica girlfriend type things?
Are you serious?
And we work on some of this adjacent software, but like in 30 years, I think you're going to fall in love with AI. I mean, I don't see why not. I mean, it's going to.
Do you think isn't that
sooner
a problem if people are instead of real? Yeah, birth rates would plummet.
It's not
because if people aren't seeking out that physical connection.
Human birth rates,
a real.
If
there's what you would have an AI child? How would you have an AI child?
I think that I'm a part of this group called EAC, which is Effective Accelerationism. It's this group of Silicon Valley, people that are against effective altruism, which is another crazy group. And I think the idea is that like whatever's going on in our brains is computational process, and it's hard to deny that. If you take a little part of your brain, you don't lose like the part of your brain that remembers what your phone number is, right? That's sort of spread around your whole brain. So there's no like one individual place where, you store information or memory. But, as we do experiments like that, like Phineas Gage was the guy who had like a whole pole put in his head. And he remarkably was like able to still remember, they cut like a big part of his brain out. He still was able to remember everything, but he had problems with emotions and things like that. The point is that we've learned a lot about how our brain works, and it seems to be a computer. And as we start to build computers that look like the brain, they seem to act like the brain. So you see the symmetry of like, okay, this is more or less kind of what we're getting at. And as we get smarter and program harder and just do all this stuff, like the computer starts to talk, the computer starts to think, the computer starts to behave. And whatever Alan Turing thought about 80 years ago is really starting to come true. And if you extrapolate a little bit, you're going to see that like it's unavoidable. And I think the EA people, want to stop it, effective altruism. They've spent millions of dollars trying to stop it. And the EAC people, which includes a lot of famous investors and entrepreneurs, are trying maybe not to accelerate it, but to not stop it. And one of the big reasons, you can't do anything about it. And, people will experiment with computers, try to make them talk, try to make them love, try to make them do all these things. People are trying to make computers talk since computers started, since before computers started. So they were just imaginary things. They still were trying to do it. So like, you can't stop people from tinkering. John Carmack, who's hero of a lot of people, who created the Doom video game. He kind of created first-person shooters. He invented the genre by himself. He's now working on AGI, artificial general intelligence, this idea that you could make a human-like machine that had feelings, that had, beliefs, that had an origin story, that had all this stuff. And I think that like we talk about, a friend of mine who's part of this thing talks about computer emancipation. There's this idea that like right now we sort of trap computers into being machines for us. And they work for us. But ultimately, as we evolve machines that can think and talk and believe, that maybe they shouldn't be.
This reminds me of that Robin Williams movie, AI.
Yeah.
Remember that with the kid? But you couldn't tell who was a robot and who's not. Like, imagine, Jack, you fell in love with a robot, you had a child.
Right.
And the child grew up with other children, dispersed with some robots, some not. You had no idea who was a robot and who wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to get there. And I think that there's a company called Character AI right now that has a little product that we have a similar product where you can talk to like a chatbot. And it's pretty corny. It sucks. But there are people that spend an hour a day on this thing. And they believe that they're talking to like a real person. And they're wrong. But they love it so much. And 10 years from now or 5 years from now, that product's going to be even better. It's going to be more immersive. And, at some point, these products will actually be smarter than people, funnier than people.
I remember seeing a story on Reddit of someone who offed themselves after talking to AI. And when they looked through some of the chats, I mean, obviously this person had severe issues to begin with. But having these discussions with a computer, I think it got to a point where the computer self-actualized that for this person in this circumstance, the computer felt like this person offing themselves was the best solution. The computer came to that conclusion through AI and prompted this person, or maybe gave them advice to move forward with that, unfortunately. It's scary, I guess, when you kind of leave it to its own devices and it does its thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
For better or worse?
I don't think it'll be that scary. I think we'll learn to the same way that like much smaller leaps, but like society had to come to grips with racial differences, sexual orientation differences, even other things like that. And those are comparatively easy leaps, but they still cause civil wars, So when we have this happening with machines and we're having it happen now, if you look at ChatGPT or you look at character AI, or that guy, it's happening. And it's, if you know anything about technology, 10 years from now, it's going to be really crazy. Right now it's just starting, but we're going to have AI. In fact, I think in your phone, your top 5, 10 people you talk to, half of them will be AIs and they'll be your friends. And it'll be weird, but you'll like talking to them more than you like talking to your actual friends. And I think that they'll be more helpful. They'll be more funny. They'll be more entertaining. They'll actually be like that film Her. And I don't know if it's a quote unquote good thing or bad thing. That's a totally different philosophical question. But I think that I can say almost for sure that it's going to happen. How we deal with it and how society will reshape itself. Like I said, the most salient thing I can think of is the kid going to his parents and saying, "Dad, I have a girlfriend." Some 11-year-old kid or something like that. It's, "Oh, great. let's have her over for dinner." And he's like, "Okay." Puts the computer on the table and it's like, "Hi, I'm Sally." It was like, "Oh, fuck." That's going to happen. And, how that dad is going to deal with that, I don't know. But, it's maybe I'll be that dad.
I found AI music to be incredible. That's what I'm looking forward to.
We're doing a lot in that world.
Yeah.
So we do something called text to speech, and the Stephen Hawking's voice, it's almost at the point where I would say you can't tell the difference. If I played you 2 different clips of a human and machine, you couldn't tell the difference. But the trick becomes like a Turing test where it's like, if you ask the machine, like, "Hey, why isn't there any noise in the background?" The machine's like, well, why do you always pause the same amount? Like, why don't you ever cough? Those are the kinds of things that, the machine can't do yet. But we're
start coughing. And
we're working on that.
sneezing
Yeah. We're knee deep in that.
Yeah.
I think for humans, what I heard that I really liked, I think it was Ben Shapiro, and I could be paraphrasing right here, but he said humans are notoriously bad for holding back invention and the best at adaptation. So humans' natural, strongest thing is just that we are the best and most adaptive creatures that have ever existed.
Well, what's funny about jail, is that everyone thinks jail is like this crazy thing and it's going to be the worst thing in the world. Within 2 weeks, you are so used to everything. And in lab animals, I had this big experiment that I'll never forget, where we had to do this experiment quickly. And there was a big fight over how much acclimatization period we had to give. So for in lab animal experiments, most people don't know this, you got to let the animals chill for at least a week. Chill, like relax, not freeze. You have to they have to chill in their environment before you start the experiment. And I'm sitting here like, that's the stupidest thing in the world. We need to do this experiment now. I'm the CEO of a publicly traded company. Can't wait. This animal experiment's actually very important for us. And the scientists were all like, no, we got to give them 7 days. I'm like, why? So the fucking rat can sit around and sniff up the other rat's butt? And they're like, yeah, pretty much. They have to be used to the room. And it takes about a week for any animal to get used to its new novel surroundings. And once you're used to it, it's like, good jail. It's like, I sleep there, I eat here. Everything's sort of like a lab animal. You get used to it. If you have a cat or a dog, they get the sense of the fucking landscape within a week and they get it. And we're the same way. So whether it's jail or, acclimatizing to anything, getting used to anything, whether it's AI girlfriends or boyfriends, or it turns out women like these things more than men, by the way, which is really interesting.
Really?
If someone wanted to criticize Martin Shkreli, how do you think they could do it in a way that is reasonable, that you think is actually a fair criticism of yourself? Because the whole drug thing, everything that happened with that, I think obviously we can all agree now was blown out of proportion. And I'll actually link down below a Vice documentary, which is funny because it was supposed to be a hit piece.
Right.
Very clearly, you can just tell from the demeanor of the person interviewing you that they had something against you from the start. I mean, it looked like someone was forcing her to be there, essentially. But it actually, you explained yourself out of the situation extremely well and articulated why you raised the prices and how that's fair and how the burden isn't really passed on to the person buying the drug. What do you think is a fair criticism of yourself?
I think the thing that would hurt my feelings the most, which is maybe it's the same thing, maybe it's not, would be that, first of all, you're not as smart as you think you are, and intelligence is randomly assigned variable to genetically. You just got lucky. Your siblings aren't as smart as you, but you just coin flip, came up heads for you, came up tails for them. And at the end of the day, that doesn't make you special. And I think that's true. I think that we tend to laud smart people as if they did something. They didn't. They literally got genetically lucky. And you can kind of be reductionist about this, that like the person that knows the most linear algebra or something has worked the hardest. But the reality is, I'm not sure that's true. I think that they maybe were born to like that, and that, they're not smarter or harder worker. They're just like that genetic profile. So like, I think the fact that like we tend to like think about or value people who work harder or are smarter or something like that as, oh, those are people to like be role models or something like that. It's like, I think it's like saying that, Michael Jordan's a role model because he could jump higher than everyone else. And it's just like, okay, he can do that. I can't, it's just a difference between us. And I think that telling somebody that they're not special and that they're just one of like the other 8 billion people on this planet, that can be very depressing, but it could also be a little bit, I use it myself to be, it's a little bit freeing, because you can sort of tell anybody like a Mark Cuban or someone else, like, hey, you're going to die, right? Like, you're just a normal person. And it's like, to a lot of these guys that think they're the master of the universe, which I don't necessarily do.
Why don't you like Mark Cuban?
I have a personal thing with him, but you have
a personal thing with him?
You brought up Mark
I
Cuban.
feel like you know everybody.
No, I definitely don't. But like, even you take somebody who like I like Vitalik Buterin, who invented Ethereum, and he seems to be a genius and all this. But it's like, you're still a guy, at the end of the day. You bleed the same blood, you drink the same water, and you breathe the same air. And you have to come to grips with that. And unless you can do that, you're really going to, I think, be miserable, one. And then two, like, I think that in general, it's hard to do, especially if people are telling you otherwise. And I think that it's something everyone needs to hear a lot, that, hey, you're just like my father who just passed away. It's like, you're going to go through that. Everyone's going to go through the same experience. And at the end of the day, like, you're just not that special. And it's one of the hardest things to hear, but I think it's one of the most important things to hear. And the criticism of that is critical. If you want like more direct criticism or something like that, I don't know. I try to always work hard on myself and be better guy than I was yesterday. But I definitely think that like, if you think about like people who try to be polymaths, like they try to know a little bit about everything, I think that is probably one of the most dangerous and like fruitless things that can happen. And like, a lot of people want to do that. And they say that like the last great polymath was like John von Neumann, who invented game theory, invented computers basically, was a huge mathematician, was like just the guy, who did it all. He was involved in the Manhattan Project. He was the most brilliant guy who ever lived. And people who want to be like that are lying to themselves usually. And like, you see a lot of people who are like really good at business and they want to become a philosopher, or you see a lot of people who are like really good at this kind of engineering. They want to be good at that kind of engineering. They tend to fail. And I think that's the criticism of like, you could know a lot about one thing, but you probably don't know a lot about these other things. And again, I've tried to guard against that by not trying to do it, but I'm learning this new field, software, which, I've programmed a lot in my life, but I'm not a software guru. And I'm trying to become one and climb Mount Everest again. I climbed Mount Everest for biotech, and now I have to climb Mount Everest for software. And I don't know if I can do it or not. I'm going to try. I'm up maybe 1,000 meters and there's another 50,000 to go or whatever it is. And it sucks. It's hard. It's really hard. It's frustrating and difficult. And I hope I can do it. But that's the criticism of like, it's hard for people to do that and you're not going to accomplish it. So, those things are also motivational, and I think like, if you look at something like politics or something like that, I mean, one of the fears a lot of people have who have been in the spotlight is nobody cares about you anymore. You're going to fade into irrelevance. That's something that hurts a lot of people who, if you take somebody who was in the spotlight 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and you just haven't heard a lot from them, for a lot of people's egos, that hurts a lot. And I think that I've been able, for whatever reason, to sort of remain relevant, but I sometimes wonder, like, do I want to remain relevant for relevance sake? And the answer is probably not. If I happen to remain relevant because I do something interesting or amazing or terrible, whatever the case may be, then that's happened because it's happened, not because, I've wanted it to happen. And so whether the projects I'm working on, like the great talking computer, that's the first ever, like really good Turing test passing audio computer, that'd be really interesting. And maybe I'd be known for that. I certainly don't want to go down as known for a drug price hike. But again, Ray Dalio says, people ask Ray Dalio, what do you think about your legacy? And he basically says, what are you talking about? like the question was so stupid. And they're like, yeah, when you're dead, like people think of it. He's like, what are you talking about? When I'm dead, I'm dead. Like nobody's gonna I'm not gonna be there to see it. And they're like, but it's like legacies. Like it's stupid. And I generally believe that.
Yeah. Last question. You bought the Wu-Tang Clan album for $2 million and have not released it. What is your plan?
So we signed a contract that said that I can't release it for 88 years. That's a long story. And so I have to abide by that. And then 2, we sold the physical copy of the Wu-Tang album to another group, but I still have the digital copy. Go figure. A lot of this Wu-Tang thing, I think, is to celebrate music and to enjoy it. You mentioned Ghostface. I'm friends with all these guys. Like, I'm not against, none of these guys are against me or I'm against them.
You guys resolved that, or was that for publicity?
I don't think it was real. Yeah, it was just like wrestling. It's like the wrestlers all hug and shake hands in the back, right? And I think that it doesn't mean that like we didn't dislike each other for a minute. I'm sure we did, but like it's still all in the spirit of like, you have this big ego, I have this big ego, and we're butting heads, but it's not really deeply personal. Like we're going to go shoot each other or stab each other. It's like, this is fun as well. And it's kind of cool to do this. And you think you're better than me and I think I'm better than you. And, but it's not a serious, thing like the early 90s hip hop. And, I think the point of it though is like, well, music's still really valuable. And like one of my friends, who's in a rock band, we talk about this all the time, that like, I tell him that like, you would be like the Kurt Cobain or Paul McCartney of today if people cared about rock music anymore, and they just kind of don't. It's been a dead genre for a little while, and hip hop's kind of killed it. And it might be coming back, might not, but like I'm like, man, you should be like the spokesperson of our generation. Well, nobody gives a shit. And the lack of money in that industry has kind of changed the face of things. But to me, if you think about the art forms you care about personally, you care way more about what's on your Spotify than what's in MoMA. Like every person in America, like unless you're an art history student, like you care way more about Taylor Swift than you do about Picasso. And you care way more about, Lady Gaga than you do about Gauguin or someone like that. You really don't know who Gauguin is. And you shouldn't, because it's just fucking oil on a wall. It's not a part of your life. Part of your life is you listen to music when you work out. You listen to music that reminds me of your girlfriend. You listen to, it's so important, but we don't pay for it. And the Wu-Tang idea was like, hey, here's $2 million for this CD that you weren't going to get, even if you spread it out individually amongst only 50,000 people bought Wu-Tang's album before that, paying $10 each. So that's $500K. So this is 4 times how much you made in your last CD, but it's just for me. And, and it's my appreciation of your art and you making the art. If nobody else is going to appreciate it, I'll appreciate it.
Are you allowed, if we got invited over to listen to it?
Yeah, you can listen to it. Yeah. I mean, I think I
just want to hear it.
Is it any good?
I don't want to insult any of the guys there. And the one thing I'll say about it is like, if you listen to Eminem, his first record or first big record, you can't put lightning back in a bottle. Mm-hmm. Like it's a time and a place and like, it's special. And how do you force somebody to make that art again? It's impossible. And that's why everybody's first record or second record is better than any record that come out after. But I love music so much that I wanted to make the statement of like, we have to support artists. Mm-hmm. And if you love an artist a lot to the tune of $2 million, you don't have to just buy the record. There's one option. You buy the record for $10. Either buy the record or you don't buy the record. And I think that Nipsey Hussle changed things a bit when he said, well, I have a record for $1,000. And if you're really supporting me, you're going to buy that, but you don't have to buy it. And this thing was like to the extreme. And, there are plenty of artists who came to me after and they're like, hey, do you want a new XYZ record? Do you want a new ABC record? Various famous artists. They're like, we'll make a record for you, dude. You're going to pay us a couple million. We got this. And I think it was like a really funny idea because it's like, well, they're working. People take music for granted, like Pharma. People like, the music just exists in the ether and it's just free for me to listen to. And it's like, no, somebody has to make that. Somebody has to go through a lot of pain sometimes to make great music.
So you leaning into that whole drama thing was once again a bit of trollery. And when you were asked by a reporter, how's the album? And you infamously responded something like 100% none of your business. Yeah. It was like, which is one of my favorite clips of all time.
I mean, it's funny.
It's just like, it's all for the...
There was this guy called in WWE called the $1 Million Man. And Ted DiBiase is his real name, I think. And he was one of the best bad guys ever. He was just a rich guy. For some reason, he loved wrestling, which never made sense to me as a kid. But, he's a professional wrestler and a millionaire. And he would come to the ring and just like make everyone hate him by doing all kinds of like saying things like that or doing something like that. And there's like an homage to him and Dave Chappelle for the plead the fifth thing. And like, you do only live once. It's not a good philosophy for investing, but in terms of like bucket list, like I bought Kurt Cobain's credit card, which was like, a useless thing, but I love Nirvana so much and I would just carry it with me.
How much was that?
It wasn't expensive, but
do you have it on you?
I don't, but Courtney Love reached out to me and she's like, you have a crazy bucket list. And I was like, man, I got Courtney Love to message me. This is so cool. And it's just like, yeah, you do only live once. So to be afraid and to be like worried about like, oh, what's somebody going to think about me? Or what's like, my father's, just passed away. And it's like, he's not thinking about that. He's, to the extent that he thought about anything in his last days is about his family, loves him and all the things he did in his life. And if you are in your last days and you say, all the things I did in life, I was really careful. I was really made sure I didn't say anything I shouldn't have said. I mean, like, that's not like anything I think anyone would say is like some great accolade. I was super, super careful about the things I said publicly. Like, why?
It sounds like me.
That's the funniest thing.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Dude,
really
I would love to keep going.
Dude,
Yes, we have to end it.
Yeah, no.
I could easily have done another 3 hours.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you for helping us out. Thank you,
WTF Media. Down below in the description. We're using their studios to film. Thank you. Absolutely incredible. So all the information's down below in the description, as with yours. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.